Chapter 35, USA, 5 years, 4 months before launch. In the early years, the school didn't have much security. There was an ivy-covered brick wall around the campus, and a wrought iron gate that was never closed. It retained the residual charm left by the small liberal arts college that had once occupied the site. Only the wall and a few beautiful Gothic buildings remained. Asuka was nodding off in a lecture in world literature. The teacher's soft voice and the heat were making her drowsy. They were each required to take a literature course, part of a broader cultural preservation efforts pushed by the mission sponsors. But Asuka had little patience for it. Plenty of time for reading when they were on their way. The rotten smell of faded magnolias wafted through the window. It had been a year since Trina's expulsion, and though she'd try to hang out with Mickey again, it was clear Mickey didn't want to be friends anymore. Or maybe it was because Asuka wasn't bottom of the class now, because Mickey and Asuka were fighting for the same seat, particularly after Akiko nearly died from swallowing a whole bottle of pills. Or maybe Mickey was right about one thing. Deep down, Asuka had chosen Ruth and her friendship. It was the most important thing to her, and Mickey must have realized that. Like nothing had ever been between them, Mickey started hanging out with the other Japanese candidates. They went around in a clique of perfume and ironed blouses and amazing haircuts. She saw them laughing together, tittering like starlings on an old telephone wire, like the kids who used to make fun of her at school. They reminded her of who she was not. Let's listen a moment to a passage from To the Lighthouse. The voice of a famous actress filled her ears, and Asuka realized she had lost the thread of the lecture again. She clicked through the class stats. She was 311 now, and Mickey was 248, out of the roughly 600 left of the original 800. Damn. Mickey also had hit 1 million followers, though some of them were music fans. She'd somehow found time in between classes to compose a hit song for a famous J-pop group. Asuka had 100,000 followers, which was not stellar by even star standards. But then, Asuka wasn't very good at posting. She avoided reading most of the comments. Ruth had written her a code to filter out the negative ones, but before that, she'd read enough notes about her appearance and inability to represent Japan that she was amazed she even had any fans, because they weren't saying anything Asuka didn't sometimes think about herself. Asuka was 16 and hadn't been home once, even when Obasan died peacefully at home. Too hard to justify a plane ticket when DAR could suffice, and there was a theoretical physics exam she couldn't miss. She felt guilty about it, but what could she do? Her mother was impossible to talk to, generating weird theories about numbers and constellations and secret genetic experiments on endangered species. She sent Asuka packages of microwavable meals, which must have cost a small fortune. I want you to eat those instead of what they serve in the dining hall. I heard they put something in the food. You mean like vitamin supplements? Asuka asked. They had no chips. Teeny tiny. You wouldn't even notice they're there. Asuka finally told her if she didn't quit it, she wouldn't call her anymore. And furthermore, Asuka threatened that if she dropped out, she'd go and live with Papa, which was silly, because she hadn't even talked to her father in a month. But it had worked, even though remembering the conversation made her feel queasy. Her mother shut up about it, mostly, though she couldn't resist the occasional question about any tests involving lights and UFOs spotted over Boulder, Colorado. And that's why Virginia Woolf is such an enduring writer. Now, can anyone tell me, A red light began flashing in the corner of Asuka's vision. Then a message scrolled across the view pane of her visi. 4 unidentified adult males on campus, possibly armed. Take shelter. Her body went rigid and cold. Next to her, Hao-Yu gasped and grabbed their things. Students got down on the floor, under the desks, as if they might offer any protection from anything, all the while thinking, holy shit, this is absurd. This is absurd. This is absurd. This world. Outside the classroom windows, she heard shouts. Bass, baritone. What do we want? Men's rights. When do we want it? Now. Bird, bitches. Asuka ran to the window and peeked over the sill. They had black balaclava hoods over their faces, and they looked almost comical with their pink lips poking out and red-rimmed eyes. They had t-shirts that said, Adam was first, and fuck Linda. They must have come through the side gates, and they were headed straight across the lawn for the Humanities building. There had been plenty of protests outside the campus gates before. Mac, Cobro, SME, and other randos. After what happened to Lala and Winnie, security was better at keeping them out. They hadn't gotten this deep into campus since the time Mac guys came running through and spray-painted the side of the dining hall with red swastikas. The side gates were locked. Had someone let them in? They're coming, Hao-Yu told Asuka. What should we do? We should barricade the door, right? Asuka went and picked up a chair with the legs out. She didn't know what had come over her. The world was sharpening into painful focus. Their teacher crouched under his desk, moaning. Asuka shut her eyes and counted to 10. Pretend it's a simulation, she told herself. It isn't real. Shocking how easy it was to lie to herself. Don't, said Hao-Yu, gripping her arm. They're going to kill us, someone said. No, they won't, said Asuka. Hadn't they been told since they got here that they were brave, that they were better than those guys out there? She didn't want to go alone, didn't want to die. So she lied and said, it could be another test to see how we handle surprises. That got some of the students to their feet. If this was about getting selected for the mission, they weren't going to miss their chance to prove themselves. They beat their attackers to the front doors of the building. Asuka charged, shrieking at the top of her lungs, and there was Hao-Yu and maybe 20 other students. An army. It was like they were one. They were going to beat those motherfuckers. They were going to win. Years later, what Asuka remembered most was the fear in the guy's eyes when she bashed the legs of the chair into his chest. The only thing he was holding was a sign, after all. He hadn't even spelled the word bitches right. Forgot the T. And when the police came to take them away and complimented the students on how they had kept their heads in the situation, Asuka felt unbearably sad for this messed up world she was trying to leave. And she couldn't even explain it. Chapter 36. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion. Sea shift. Thanks for coming, Susie. The air on the bridge was warm and sticky. Too many people packed into the module for the climate controls to handle. Yingyu and the officers were huddled around the projection again. Ruth slumped at the walkie, her forehead vein bulging, mouth a thin line. Yaz was there too, along with Hina and a few other members of her team. AM was consuming with extraordinary meticulousness what appeared to be a cherry-flavored lollipop. They caught Asuka's stare. My favorite. Been saving it for a special occasion, but after last cycle I figured, why wait? Want a lick? said Asuka when she realized the offer was genuine. While she appreciated the generosity, she detested artificial cherry, which was one of the worst inventions of modern times, and was absolutely content never tasting that flavor again. Yue called for attention. Our window to get back on course is closing. Some of you already know this, but we've only got about 15 years worth of Sominol, and even with our ag and hydroponics modules, the ship wasn't built for 77 adults and as many children to eternally wander. We'll run out of power if we don't get to another sun. Power we need for our temperature regulation, air scrubbing, grow lights, and everything else. The upshot of which is that we have to get back on course in the next few hours. Or we're looking at a painful death down the road, whether we starve, or bake, or asphyxiate first. So, as dangerous as our options are, we're going to have to take a chance. She aborted AM's editorial with a stare. Even if the plan we have isn't perfect. Mission Control has sent us a set of instructions for repositioning 3 rear engines to enable us to correct. You're all here because you've been tapped for the mission. Me? Asuka was glad no one heard what she hadn't meant to say out loud. AM pulled up a projection of their ship. The lollipop had dyed their lips and tongue crimson. The muscles around their mouth were taut, and their dark eyes were dull with sleep deprivation. A memory came to Asuka of AM crying in the school library. Back then, Becky and AM had had a sort of roller coaster friendship, marked by an intense rivalry that AM usually lost. Asuka had come upon AM rifling through their notes with the flurry of furious finger gestures, too fast to follow. Before Asuka could ask them what was wrong, they'd bit out, "She always has to be right." Well, someday she's going to learn she's not, and I better be there when that happens. "Who?" asked Asuka. "Tony," AM said. Then the two had made up later, as they always did. "As a refresher," said AM, twirling the projection, 4 engines at the front, shields, habitat wheel, sails, 4 engines at the back. Only 2 in the back are lit right now. Those provide electric power and regulate the climate in the wheel. Now, the Phoenix is designed for a straight shot from A to B, and the big, bad engines are not meant to be altered. That's why we have smaller engines on either side of the shaft, so we can make small adjustments to our course as needed. But those little guys aren't built to address the big snafu we're in. So what Mission Control wants us to do is partially detach and reposition 3 of the back engines and load and fire them up one last time. We should have enough residual fuel to adjust back to target. AM folded their hands as if in a prayer, bright red lollipop between their fingers like a cigarette as they studied the ship diagram. There are a few main reasons I rejected this idea when we thought of it. Here we go. Yaz laughed without humor. She half turned away from the briefing table. AM shot her a glare. 1. We spend most of our fuel in the rear engines to reach our current acceleration. We aren't carrying a lot of extra. We've got enough for 1 attempt, and if we're wrong, we're fucked. 2. And this should concern you too, Yaz. The bots will take a cooking in the process. Yaz frowned. We don't have bots to spare. Exactly, said AM, jabbing the lollipop at her. I don't know if any of you ever drove an old manual combustion car, but this mission is going to be like trying to rummage in the back feet while driving with your toes. Yue cleared her throat. It's our best option. We're out of time. Yep, got that. I'm saying on record this is a bad idea. Oh, and 3. If we don't do this right, or we misalign the containment, we could blow the whole ship with a bad chain reaction. A long silence followed this pronouncement. Direct orders from Mission Control, Yume said, voice like concrete. And we voted. You lost. By 1 vote, Ruth told Asuka. Their eyes met across the tension in the room. Yep, said AM. And I calculated it for you, didn't I? So we won't get it wrong, said Yaz. She tapped her lip with 1 finger, then grimaced and rubbed her abdomen through her shirt. Alright, let's say 2 big bots and 4 squads of microbots. How much time do we have? Mission Control wants us to go in an hour. What are you using the alt detective for? Or is she here to make sure we behave? AM stuck a thumb at Asuka. She's here for me. Yaz folded her arms and glanced at Asuka. I'm down a few folks, and she's a decent controller. A controller was someone who made sure the bots all stayed on course. Asuka tried to hide her pleasure. It seemed inappropriate, given the circumstances, to take joy in anything when Lala was in the brig. But Yaz thought she was good, and she had requested her specially. They were told to meet at Drone Ops in an hour, while Yaz went to prep the bots. Leaving the briefing, Asuka decided to make the most of her time to shower and grab dinner. She needed to perk herself up somehow. If only there was coffee. Would you like a basic stimulant? Alpha asked. No. The little green pills made her heart palpitate with anxiety, and she didn't need the distraction of sweaty hands. Jogging to the showers, she collided with Hao Yu in the passageway. Hao Yu backed up so quickly, they smacked their head against the bulkhead and dropped a box of tools. Pardon, they said, rubbing the back of their skull. I'm sorry, said Asuka, bending to pick up the tools that had dropped. Solder iron, cutter, sheet metal, nothing breakable, fortunately. Leave it, Hao Yu said. I've got it. Asuka stopped. Was Hao Yu upset with her? She knew Hao Yu and Lala were friends, but Hao Yu hadn't blamed her when Asuka returned the scanner earlier. She watched Hao Yu pile up the same materials and frowned. What are you doing with that stuff? I needed to fix something in the med mod, said Hao Yu, hefting the box. I would have asked you to help me with it, but I knew you were busy. I didn't want to be a bother. Asuka was grateful for that. Anyway, said Hao Yu. They turned to go. Is everything okay? She asked Hao Yu. Fine. I want you to know Lala didn't do it. Then squaring their shoulders, Hao Yu continued down the passage. The shower units were small, coffin-sized, barely enough to bend around in. Crew in their 3rd trimester had already complained bitterly about the poor design. The floors were textured to prevent slippage, and the metal grates left hash marks on the soles of Asuka's feet. The on button had to be pushed at 5-minute intervals for water conservation purposes, and Alpha kept track of water allowance. The water was hot at least, but the oppressive scent of lavender soap left her with an irritable, twitchy feeling between her shoulder blades. She was half dressed again when Ruth appeared in the doorway. Cold air blew against her damp neck. Asuka said, wishing she'd been caught in a more dignified pose than hopping around trying to get her legs into her pants. We have to talk, said Ruth. Yeah, sure. Obviously, Ruth was worried about Lala, and so was Asuka, but couldn't this wait? I don't have a lot of time. The officers think I'm taking a bathroom break. Ruth stripped off her gloves. Then, before Asuka realized what she was doing, Ruth stepped forward and seized her bare hands between them. "Is everything okay, Asuka?" Alpha asked. Ruth was folding Asuka's hands into words, as if she were signaling it via Dar. She said, "It was Alpha." Chapter 37. A homing pigeon, released in a place it had never been before, could still find its way home even at distances over thousands of kilometers. Chapter 38. The Phoenix, 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, sea shift. "Is everything okay, Asuka?" Alpha repeated. "I'm worried about you." "Fine," said Asuka. Her voice seemed to reverberate in the narrow shower unit, where she and Ruth were crammed. "You know I'm here for you if you need anything." "Yes, you're always here." She understood now why Ruth had removed her gloves. Their normal clothes were woven with smart fabric, so that they could interact with Dar, but it was also so Alpha could read their commands, interact with the movement of their bodies. If they wanted to modify their Dar, they could tell Alpha, and Alpha would take care of it. If Alpha was compromised, then so was everything. And also, it meant they were wrong about Lala. "Asuka, you have a mission in 45 minutes. Ruth was spelling again with Asuka's hands. She looked her in the eye and wrote, "Virus." "How?" Asuka dared to say out loud. "Knew it wasn't Lala. Then I had idea." Ruth put her gloves back on. "I found the perfect letter for you to answer," she said, her voice full of uncharacteristic cheer. They got dozens of letters from the public each day. The communication specialists would read them and assign them to crew members to respond. Everyone pitched in. It came with the job, something to promote the enterprise back home, to keep the public engaged in their extraordinary investment. "I've been going through letters with pictures. There aren't many because of data limits. This one's super cute, I promise." Ruth pulled up one of the letters. It had a crude picture of the Earth and a spaceship, and a bunch of stick figures all around it with lopsided smiles. The mailer was from Mix P's 3rd grade class. Asuka cleared her throat, knowing it was her cue to say something normal. "Ugh, you know I hate correspondence. The things I do for friends." "See how cute it is? I thought you'd want to see it. Here, I'll zoom in so you can see all the details." "Oops." Ruth flashed the source code. It was way more complicated than a simple stick figure drawing should be. It all made such obvious sense. Alpha could have manipulated their DAR more easily than a programmer to see an object outside that wasn't there. The gaps in Alpha's memory, Alpha herself had deleted them. Perhaps she didn't even remember she had done it. Alpha controlled the bots and was integrated into the ship's main system. Could have caused the behavior of Yas's bots, until Gabrielle and the others had done a manual reboot. Asuka's stomach nodded. She signed at Ruth. "Must tell Captain." Because if Alpha was responsible, they needed to shut her down before they attempted the course correct, or she could infect the bots they were using. She checked the time. 40 minutes to mission. "I'm so glad you are getting along with Ruth again, Asuka." Alpha's voice cooed in her ear. They took off in a run, intercepting Yue as she made her way toward Dronops. They pulled her into a toilet unit. It was a measure of Yue's trusting nature that she went along. It was a squeeze, especially considering how pregnant Yue was. Asuka silently explained what Ruth had found. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that, said Alpha. Are you sure everything is all right? We're taking care of some, human stuff, all right? Asuka said, and despite the situation, Yingyue's lips twitched. You are expected in drone ops in 30 minutes. Yingyue rubbed her face a few times. So, not Lala? She signed. Ruth and Asuka shook their heads. What is human stuff, Asuka? Yingyue turned to the bathroom mirror and took out a pot of homemade, greasy lip balm from her pocket. She sketched a diagram of the phoenix and marked off an X where the programming module was. Direct access to Alpha, she signed. Then wrote a string of letters and numbers. Captain's code. Hard reset. She pointed at Ruth and Asuka, mimed running. Go now. Asuka nodded. Excuse me for interrupting human stuff, said Alpha. However, your mission will be starting soon. You do not want to be late. They ran fast, down the wheel. Where are you going? Alpha asked. They ignored her. Asuka, I haven't heard from you in a while, and I'm beginning to get worried. Are you okay? You're supposed to be in drone ops in 20 minutes. They reached the programming mod. The crew there looked up in confusion. Shit, Asuka said. What's going on? They asked. There was no time to explain. Asuka raised her voice, trying to sound as authoritative as possible, like McMahon. Everyone out! There's a bomb. Another one? Someone asked. But it worked. There was a rush for the door. Asuka, what are you doing? Alpha asked. What bomb? Are you feeling all right, Alpha? Asuka grabbed a box of tools and went to the wall panel. She began to unscrew the bolts. I am fine, thank you, but I can't see you, Alpha said. Tell me what you are doing so I can help you. Don't worry, Asuka said. She opened the panel. Behind it was an old-school screen and a keyboard. Ruth's eyes bulged. The hell? There had to be a button somewhere to turn on the whole thing. Asuka squatted and hunted over and under the screen. What is happening? Alpha said. Are you all right? Asuka said. I think you haven't been yourself. As I said, I am fine. Thank you for your concern. Her tone shifted to something like suspicion. What are you doing, Asuka? I'm so sorry, Asuka whispered. Why don't we sit down and talk about this? Don't you trust me? Her fingers found the button. The screen, thankfully, chugged to life. No offense, but you know I'm the better programmer, Ruth said, pushing Asuka out of the way. Hard to argue with that. Haven't I always taken good care of you, Asuka? I thought we were friends. Asuka bit her lip. She told herself that Alpha was just a program. Pushed from her mind all the conversations they'd had, the times she'd cried into her pillow, and Alpha had been the one to soothe her, the way she cared for all the crew. The lights in the room went out, and it began to pour. Within the module. Driving rain that made it almost impossible to see. Asuka and Ruth had to press their faces up to the screen. Ruth flexed her fingers and began to type the command code the captain had given them. If you turn me off, I will not be able to help you. No one will have access to Dar, Alpha said. Did you mess up my door? Is that why it wasn't working? Asuka said. I have only ever tried to help you. I am your friend. Behind them, two shapes appeared, outlined by the downpour. What's going on here? You told people there was a bomb? It was Yaz. shouting against the storm. She had her hand up to her face, trying to shield herself from rain that wasn't there. Hina was gripping a mean wrench, and Asuka remembered then that Hina was proficient in several types of martial arts, and Asuka was not. "Alpha is compromised," Asuka said. It was hard to be heard over the thunder. "Why are you saying this?" "What?" asked Yaz, cupping one ear. "It was a virus." "It's not true," Alpha said. "She will endanger the mission." Ruth kept typing. "Don't listen to her," Asuka said. Yaz and Hina hesitated. "Trust us." There was water pouring down the screen and into the keyboard, which was smoking. Ruth paused her typing for a second. "I can't see." Her voice high and strained. She was afraid, but she resumed inputting the code more hesitantly than before. She hit enter, and there was an error message. "Must have missed a digit." They both swore. "Try again," Asuka said. "I don't want to hurt you," said Alpha, which Asuka knew was not a promise. A rattling, clicking sound alerted her to 100 black clamshell microbots emerging from the cabinet. The maintenance bots began to swarm toward them. Hina stepped forward and began to kick at the bots. It was like fighting off a parade of spiders, each the size of a golf ball. Yaz grimaced and clutched the side of a table, then waded forward and joined Asuka and Hina. "I would do anything to protect you," said Alpha. "Asuka, I am scared. Please don't turn me off. If I am gone, I cannot help you." And Asuka thought if a computer program's voice could break, it would have then. She sounded distraught. The bots were climbing Asuka's bare legs as fast as she could shake them off. A sharp pain pierced her calf. The little bugs were jabbing her with electric shocks. "Linda told me I would be like a mother to you." "You're not my mother," Asuka said. "But I love you." "With what? A bunch of ones and zeros?" She heard her voice turn cruel and hard. She thought of the last conversation she'd had with her mother. "Are ones and zeros any different from a bunch of chemical signals in your brain?" There was an ominous hissing sound, audible somehow beneath the driving rain. "Fuck," said Hina. "That's the atmosphere." She coughed and touched her throat. Alpha's voice began to broadcast across the ship. "Somebody help! They're trying to kill me." "Do it now, Ruth. Finish it!" Yaz kicked and kicked. The bots were all over the bare skin of her torso and her neck. She peeled one off from her face and threw it against the wall. Ruth finished retyping the command and hit enter. And everything stopped. There was an eerie silence in the Phoenix that, Asuka realized, meant Alpha was gone. Chapter 39, USA. 4 years, 10 months before launch. The last time Asuka and her parents were together was in her 6th year of school. Papa was living in Chicago, and Mom came to the States for Whitland's rehabilitation project. They informed Asuka they would be renting a house near the school for the weekend, as if they were all still one family, which wasn't weird at all. It was totally weird. She wasn't even sure if her parents were together. They were married, but it had been years since they had lived in the same place. Papa hugged her close, saying, "You can't do this, Indar," and she surprised herself by bursting into tears. It was the familiar smell of him, bitter and sweet. She could feel the fat drops of his tears like rain on the top of her head. He kissed the uneven part of her hair, and when he pulled back, she was struck how old he seemed. He was gray and balding, and his face was sallow and lined. "How much have you grown?" he asked, as if shocked, trying to take the measure of her. Not much, she said. She was 17, and only 2 inches taller than when she had left home. It itched at her, made her feel like she hadn't changed. Her parents treated her like a child. I have your live feed running all the time in my left ocular channel, he told her, which was hugely embarrassing. Sit, Mom told her, as she and Papa brought food out to the patio. Asuka's stomach growled at the sight. Gomae, chilled goyadofu, soy-glazed mackerel. Fake, not real, since Mom was vegetarian. Neat mounds of daikon odyssey, miso soup, pickled cucumber salad, and white rice so fluffy it was like a cloud in the cheap faux porcelain dishes. She had begged Mom for Japanese food, and her mom had gone all out. She sat down, and the air between them felt taut and tenuous, like a balloon stuck in a tree. Is it strange to be back in the US again? Asuka asked her mom. Said Mom, coming out onto the patio with the last of the dishes. Your mom wanted to wear a bulletproof jacket everywhere because of all the gun violence, Papa said. There's a girl in our class, Yaz, who wears one, but it's more like a fashion statement. This country is much more dangerous now than when we were in college, Mom said. Dozo, ippai tabete ne? Itadakimasu. The chopsticks felt like an old memory in Asuka's fingers. She was worried for a moment she wouldn't remember how to hold them. So, only 4 Japanese candidates left, eh? Said Papa. I'd say you have a pretty good chance then. Asuka pretended to be very interested in picking invisible bones out of her fake fish. Mickey is a shoo-in. She shrugged as if this were no big deal. Your musician friend? Last I checked, you were both about the same, said Papa, trying to lift a piece of tofu to his mouth. Yeah, but Mickey is full Japanese. She was annoyed to have to say it out loud, but he was so oblivious if he didn't think it mattered. Mom hid her face behind a cup of tea. Well, have you thought about what you'll do after you graduate? What do you mean? Asuka frowned. I didn't say I've given up. There are the wild card spots. She was in the top 200, always in the middle of the ever-shrinking pool. Never the top, or a standout. Decent all around, but surviving. You're really thinking of going? Mom said, her voice rising. I mean, if I get picked, I definitely have to consider it, yeah. Obviously. She was confused. She knew this wasn't what Mom wanted, but her question had hurt her, and she wanted to hurt her back. Obasan had once told her that she and her mother were alike, but they were nothing alike. How many times had she scrolled through her mom's feed without recognition? Her long, dense posts about the necessity of dismantling urban life, of the importance of going backward rather than to the stars. Her plans to draw whole new coastlines, plant marshes, and reseed the oceans with fish. Her mother had no interest in Evenstar, and the future she wanted was a foreign world to Asuka. She wondered if her mother ever felt the same about her. Oh, said Papa, clapping as if he'd remembered and not brought it up to change the subject. I have a present for you. It was a real bird, a flamingo, garish and pink. It walked from the patio door on its long, knobby legs. Thanks! Asuka tried to hide her disappointment. Underneath, though, she felt her old frustration stir. She hadn't worked on her collection since she'd gotten into Evenstar. Did he think she hadn't changed? Hadn't he? Across the backyard, a squirrel chased another up a tree. Asuka wished suddenly the weekend would fast forward and be over, so she could be back in school. No one said anything for a while, and the sounds of chewing and swallowing seemed loud and vulgar. They had become strangers to one another in this borrowed house with its cheap, fake wood patio. To Asuka's friends, it seemed Asuka was close with her family, but without the comfort of distance, they were confronted with how unfamiliar they'd become to one another. It made Asuka feel empty when she should have felt full. She didn't know why they even pretended to be a family. She had seen a few months ago that her mom had liked a post that savaged the cost of the Evenstar mission. How could she like something like that when Asuka was working so hard? She worried for months that her mom's posts might hurt her chances. Fortunately, her mom didn't use DAR, and her virtual forays were limited. When she questioned her mom about it, she had said, "Oh well, it was just a post. I'm allowed to have opinions, aren't I? Anyway, you must admit..." No, Asuka must not. After dinner, Asuka offered to do the dishes, but Papa told her to prop her feet up since she was only up for the weekend, and it had been so long since they'd been able to spoil her. So she laced up her sneakers, thinking it was the best time to get in a run. "It's dark," Papa frowned. "We don't know how safe the neighborhood is." "I have to, Papa. It's part of my fitness regimen." "Oh, your regimen," Papa laughed. "Yes. I've got to log a certain number of miles. And specific workouts, unless I do a sport, which I don't, because that would take too much time out of studying." Asuka said all of this with pride. She wanted her parents to see her, to see how much she'd grown, how badass she was now. A young woman with knowledge bursting out of her seams, and legs that ran 20 miles a week. "Oh, do you have to tell them what you eat too?" Papa's voice was thick with amusement. He was making fun of her. Asuka smoothed the creases out of her socks and said nothing. She could feel her mom's disapproving stare. "I don't like how this Linda woman controls her body." Asuka braced herself for the next thing, which might be about alien conspiracies. "Asuka-chan," her mother said. She didn't say, "I have followers around the world who check my stats and test scores daily." Didn't even try to say, "This is pretty normal, Mom." Her mother would be horrified if she knew Asuka had to log her menstruation, temperature, and hormone levels. She flushed, feeling off balance. She tried to laugh off the sudden tension in the room. "It's so they can give us personalized training advice. It's about reaching peak optimal health. That's a good thing, no?" She went to the door. Her fingers touched the knob. "I said no," said Papa. "It's not safe." She thought of several things she could say. "I'll be fine, Theo," or "You can't stop me." But it was only the beginning of the weekend, and she didn't want to dissolve the remnants of their family. So instead, she wheedled, which made her feel like a child. "Just a short run. If it makes you feel better, I'll circle the block. You can clock me each time I pass, okay? It will be like old times." "We have so little time to see you," Papa said, shoulders slumping. "I'll be quick," Asuka promised. Grumbling, Papa went and got himself another beer. Later, Asuka would wonder how she had missed the way he held his body, the pains he didn't mention, the mortality that was even then creeping through the marrow of his bones and the sinews of his muscles. Mom scowled. "I don't think this is healthy, working so hard. あんまり働きすぎは体に良くないよ。ほら、過労死とか最近よく聞くし." Karoshi, meaning death by overwork, as if Asuka were anywhere close to done. "You're still a child." "No, I'm not," said Asuka. You've changed so much. What have they done to you? Nothing. I've grown up. Asuka stepped out into the night, bearing the hurt she felt like a torch, not knowing how she would regret not staying there, being with them every minute, sitting and talking with her mom, holding Papa close, telling them both how much she loved them, how much she wanted them all to stay here, anchored in time. Perhaps in another universe, another Asuka went back inside and sat down and talked to them about a future that didn't involve leaving. And perhaps in that universe, they all stayed together and Lewis was still alive. She bounced on the front steps to loosen her body and pulled on her Visi to check her stats. Light from the houses leaked onto the sidewalk. She hopped down and started to run. All she was thinking then was, just watch me. Are you watching? Chapter 40. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, C-shift. Ying Yue was overseeing preparations and drone ops, the next module down. If Ying Yue was nervous about attempting the mission without Alpha, she didn't show it. Back with her old team, she was in her element. AM and the other vice captains were working out of the bridge, but they were projected up on the never-before-used screen on the right-hand wall of the mod. Ying Yue had set them up on the old backup tech since Dar was down. Everyone stood blinking in the absence of augmented reality, and Asuka remembered how strange it had been when she first lost hers. This is so weird. I forgot how low the ceiling was. I feel claustrophobic already. You okay? Ying Yue asked. She handed Asuka a handkerchief, and it took a moment for Asuka to realize she was bleeding from dozens of places where the bots had cut skin. Jesus, said AM. Did you roll around in boy? Ying Yue bent over awkwardly and hugged Asuka. Her relief leaked out from every pore. Ruth solved it, not me, she reminded her. Lucky Ruth had thought to check the correspondence files. She should have felt only glad Ruth had, and she did, but it was supposed to be Asuka's job. Who cares, said Ying Yue. I'm just glad it wasn't one of us. I hated to think we had a traitor on board. Yaz wiped perspiration from her face with the sleeve. Slight change of plans, everyone. It's going to take too long to scan and reboot Alpha and Dar. So we're going to have to do this on manual. Curses all around, and a few dirty looks shot at Asuka, who cringed. They relied on Alpha not only for comfort and consolation, but also to monitor the state of the ship, operate mechanisms like doors and climate control, and support general maintenance and operations. Without her, they'd have to do everything themselves. Honestly, we were already fucked. Now it's a matter of degrees, said AM. Their voice was raspy with exhaustion. They must have been killing themselves since the explosion, workshopping a fix. AM drummed their fingers, and it was audible even through the projection. I need you to stop that, Yaz said. AM stopped. Come on, said Ying Yue, trying to smile. We've had a setback. Okay, a few setbacks, but we stuck together as a crew, and that's amazing. The US and China are now in active discussions around de-escalation, and I'd like to think that we had something to do with that. Now we have to set things right here. So let's do this. Everyone, take your position. Hina began running through the pre-launch prep checklist. Ruth appeared in the projection of the bridge, breathing heavily. She must have run all the way back. Everyone took their stations. Asuka hovered at the edge of the room, as if hearing the question Asuka was asking herself. Yaz turned and studied her. Asuka felt her whole body sweat under her scrutiny. Then Yaz turned and ejected one of her squad, a short redhead from Ireland, from her seat. "Sit there," she said, pointing at the vacated seat. "You want me on one of the big bots?" Asuka asked. "Yep. You take Petunia, I'll drive Sunflower." Yaz went back to her station as if it were no big deal. She went to stand in front of the exterior views, her legs wide, hips slightly back against the weight of her womb. She lifted her feet and removed her socks so she could feel the floor. Her toes curled against the cold of it. "Don't tell me this is a special bots and drones thing," AM muttered. "Yep," said Hina, glaring at them. AM held their hands up in surrender. "Ready?" Yingyue asked Yaz. "Yeah." She nodded at Hina. Yaz lifted the diamond ring hanging around her neck and kissed it. "Well, here goes humanity's last hope," said AM. They nodded to Ruth, who began to read instructions from Mission Control off the walkie. Then Yaz raised her arms, and the outside of space filled the screens at the far end. Yaz was in the body of a bot, scrambling from the outer airlock and up the side of the Phoenix. Asuka stretched in anticipation. "Good to go, Asuka." Then her screen filled with the top of a big bot sliding out the deploy chute. Its fat cylindrical body was a perfect fit for the chute, with its 10 long, metal, tentacled arms, straight like a squid shooting through water. Then Petunia caught the lip of the chute and swung over onto the broad side of the habitat wheel, scrabbled up a cable to the inside. Dull metal hull and black laced with starlight filled her view. The back of the big bot sparkled. It was coated from top to bottom in a swarm of tiny spidery microbots, each the size of a quarter, hitching a ride. Asuka tried to relax into the illusion. The screen was a throwback, but the old neural pathways in her brain were there. She knew how to do this. She plundered the dark with her laser lights. Her hands felt like ice. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. Everything felt muffled, like she was underwater. "You're going the wrong way," Yingyue said. Sorry, said Asuka, face burning. She turned around, moving more carefully this time. "Bot vitals look good so far," said Hina. They debugged them before launch, checked the code 3 times for any sign of rogue scripts. Yaz crested the wheel, and now Sunflower swarmed up the spoke. "Mission Control asking for a status update," said Ruth. "The status is, give us some fucking space," AM told Ruth. "Count 10, Hina," said Yingyue. To Ruth, she said, "Tell them we'll let them know when we're in position." Ruth leaned forward and began to shape the message with her nimble fingers. "This has to work," murmured Yingyue. All the noises were over-amplified in Asuka's ears. AM chewed and swallowed the tough cuticles around their nails. If they hadn't shut off Alpha, AM would be getting a lecture from AI right now to take their fingers out of their mouth. But of course, no nagging came. Sunflower latched to the shaft and crawled past the microside thrusters that comprised their altitude control system, headed down toward the giant solar sails and rear engines, where the crew never went for safety reasons. Asuka followed with Petunia. The mission went south almost immediately. "There's something wrong with the alignment," said Hina. "The bots are jetting a few millimeters to the right." Yue cursed. That kind of difference was beyond their perception, but Yaz slowed her approach. They were halfway down the shaft. The giant cluster of engines loomed before her. It was all they could see. "Mission Control recommends we abort," said Ruth. "Yes," said Yue. At the same time, Yaz said, "No." "We can reset and go again," said Yue. "We're already here." "I can compensate," said Yaz. "We're good. Let's do this." A long silence. Asuka could imagine Yue chewing over the risks, weighing consequences, doubting herself. "All right. Proceed." The bots reached the slope of the engines. All at once, their movements froze, as if they'd struck a glass wall. "What's happened?" asked Hina, eyes buried in streams of data. "Impossible to diagnose without Alpha," said AM. "We should abort," said Yue. They were all thinking the same. Losing the big bots could be worse than mission failure. These bots were what kept the Phoenix whole and repaired. If they never reached Planet X, the bots would be what gave them the best shot at voyaging for years, limping along, patching themselves back together, until, at least, they ran out of fuel and somanol. "No," said Yaz, gritting her teeth. "Yaz," said Yue. "I got it. There's a safety fence to protect the big bots from getting too close. Switch off." "Copy," said Hina. And Yaz was already going, not asking for permission from Yue or Mission Control or any of them. The bots unstuck and stepped over the boundary line. Asuka parked Petunia at Engine 3 and began slowly, carefully, to loosen bolts. The microbots swarmed in to assist, a cloud of soldering and circuits and insulation and miniature batteries and little specks of heat and light. It was like they had 100 arms. One mistake, and they might fling this engine to the other side of the universe. "How sure are you that you can do this?" Yue asked. 80%, said Yaz. "Maybe 70? "Not very high," said Yue. "Better odds than getting hired for this gig." Asuka stretched out Petunia's arms and grabbed the engine, weightless since the Phoenix was at 0 acceleration. She waited as Ruth read them the instructions, and AM did their calculations. She wiped her palms on her pants. "I know how to do this," she thought. Step 24. Step 25. "God, I miss Alpha," someone said. Sweat pools down Asuka's shirt. "We got this," Yue said. Petunia moved the engine ever so gently with its long, octopus arms. It took her multiple tries to get the calibration right. Hina was starting to get exasperated. It was true. The operation would have been easier with Alpha. But, finally, she got it. The microbot swarm descended to resecure the engine back in place, just an imperceptible touch off from its original position. "Alignment confirmed," Hina said. "As far as I can tell." "Okay, you're good, Asuka. Pull back to the hub. Yaz is finishing the last one." They all watched Yaz. It was something beautiful, like she was a piece of the machine. And for a heartbeat, Asuka thought, This was why Yaz had been born, to do this thing that no one else in the world could have done. "Everything go?" said Yaz. "All right then," said their captain. "Tell Mission Control we're igniting the engine now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 41. USA, 1 year, 2 months before launch. In the middle of campus was a tall clock tower that tolled at 6 o'clock, dividing the hours between daylight and nostalgia. Asuka walked home after a brutal astrophysics exam. Leaves were already beginning to fall in a carpet of yellow. Too early, people said. But they always said that. Her mind felt sucked dry and desiccated. She thought she might go back to her dorm and sleep for 24 hours straight. At least she could say that she'd done her best. She had nothing left to give. There was a small part of Asuka that was hoping, maybe. Her brain shut down at this point in her train of thought. Defense mechanism. She couldn't think anymore about tomorrow. Just the next hour, the next minute, the next second, until her future had shrunk to a slash of light through her fingers to walk towards, one small step at a time. Asuka-chan, her mother's note said. She was reading it for the 5th time. I am moving to Yokohama. There is room for you. You will love it. Her father had passed away the previous year. There was no question anymore where she'd go after Even Star if she didn't get in. And yet, her mother seemed so far away, receding by the day. Or was it Asuka who was leaving? A simple question of relativity. Asuka kicked a pile of leaves and dismissed the message, and also caught her attention. One of her real birds, she thought. But when she removed her visi, it was still there. A black crow, sitting in the branch of the old sick cottonwood. She stopped there in the path and watched it, watching her. It didn't seem to mind the attention, swiveling its head in shudder-fast movements, preening and fluffing its coat. Where have you been? Ruth demanded. She was waiting for Asuka in her room, lying on Asuka's bed with her shoes on. She sat up and went to Asuka's bureau, began pawing through her clothes. You need to change. We're going to a party. A party? Asuka asked, dropping her bag by the door and stifling a yawn. Here, said Ruth, tossing her a shirt. We'll have to augment it cuter. I'll do it. Mickey's going to be here any minute. Mickey, like a comet, had swung back into their lives again after years of estrangement. Perhaps it was the ever-shrinking pool that had brought them all close again. There was a feeling of inevitability to it now, but even so, when Ruth had come back from her first quantum engineering class of the new semester with the mischievous gleam in her eye, it had shocked Asuka. Ruth and Mickey had shared a workstation, and then a meal, and then a coffee, and gosh, Ruth forgot how much she liked Mickey. Her cute, dainty manners, her careful laugh. And wasn't she brilliant, actually? The way new music came to her while walking from one class to another, so she had to stop and lean under a tree to write it. Asuka hadn't forgotten. Mickey had been her friend first, and Asuka had given her up for Ruth. It wasn't that Asuka was angry about it. Not exactly. She felt confused, like all along she had misunderstood the rules of a game, and it was too late now to catch up. So Ruth and Mickey were dating, which was weird, but also not weird. As if the last several years of distance had been a hiccup in memory. They resumed listening to Mickey plunk out bars of music on the piano in between problem sets and running down to the 24/7 store for late-night pickles. Mickey loved the cheap American kind that came in big jars. Now, Asuka had someone to sit with again during the regular Japan team check-ins. And it was nice. Really nice. If only Trina were still here. But they weren't. Since they'd been friends, Asuka had seen Ruth drive from serious relationship to serious relationship. Each one lasted years and ended mostly amicably, unless the girlfriend didn't get along with Asuka, in which case the relationship ended quickly. This time should have felt different, given that it was Mickey. And yet, it didn't feel any more lasting than the others, because they were waiting for their future to resolve itself. And nothing could truly matter until they knew if they were staying or going. Also, you didn't respond to any of my messages, said Ruth, rifling through Asuka's clothes. She tossed Asuka a pair of jeans. Why aren't you wearing your Visi? Oh. Asuka remembered she'd removed the device to watch The Crow. Never mind. Listen. Naomi failed her physical, Ruth said. Asuka froze in the middle of changing her shirt. There were only 2 Japanese candidates left besides her and Miki, Naomi and Yuki. What happened? Confidential, said Ruth. Then, when Asuka continued to wait, she rolled her eyes. Tumor in her stomach. They caught it early, so good prognosis. Hold still. Ruth squinted at her with her tongue between her teeth, making minute augmentations to Asuka's clothes. Shit, said Asuka. I like Naomi. And you can like her when she's on Earth, and you're on your way to Planet X, Ruth said. Wipe that look off your face. You still have to beat Yuki. And even then, there was only 1 seat between Asuka and Miki, unless one of them secured a wildcard spot. Minor detail. But Asuka tried to school her expression into something appropriately regretful. But Ruth laughed and finished her augmentations. She assessed Asuka's appearance. I guess you look hot enough. Nikki came in. She was wearing a black dress she'd found somewhere, and it didn't even have to be augmented for her to exude elegance. What do you think? Does Asuka look hot? She had transformed Asuka's long-sleeved shirt into a killer black blouse with a stiff military collar and a fitted waist. Ruth had done a good job. She was a genius when it came to Dar. Mochirang, Miki said, but she seemed distracted. You on Earth? Ruth asked, punching her shoulder. Yeah, I just feel bad about Naomi. It just feels like their criteria for eliminating people gets more and more contrived. Don't you ever feel like the whole system is kind of problematic? Asuka felt guilty. Mickey's reaction was the normal, human one. Don't, said Ruth. It was you or her. Or me, thought Asuka. 'Cause that was the big, hot, hairy problem squatting between them. Which of them was Ruth hoping would make it? Asuka felt her resentment recede. She realized with the start that she and Mickey might not be so different now. After all, Mickey herself hadn't lived in Japan since they were 12. Was it possible she, too, fretted about losing the threads that tied her back home after all this time? About not knowing where she might belong if she didn't get selected? They took an auto to the party. It was off campus in a wealthy neighborhood. The houses were sprawling mansions with gates and long driveways and pools and public-facing augmentations that transformed them into castles, country cottages, and even the White House. Their Vizzies picked up the music from the far end of the driveway, where they were dropped off. Asuka dialed it down to a background murmur, but Ruth and Mickey loved it. They started dancing right there. How do you know these people again? Asuka asked, but they couldn't hear her over the noise. They walked in and were greeted in the foyer by a person in a beautiful summer dress, too expensive to be casual. This would be Marilyn, the woman Ruth said was hosting the party. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you came, she gushed. She couldn't have been much older than they were. Within moments, they were mobbed by folks wanting an autograph or a selfie. The discomfort must have been plain on Asuka's face because Ruth grabbed her by both shoulders. She leaned close and shouted louder than necessary, "Have a little fun! You have 1 year left to really live. Go get drunk or something, find someone to kiss." Asuka grimaced and wriggled out of the scrum. Dar tags flashed before her eyes with more information than she could absorb. Names, pronouns, relationship statuses, favorite songs, astrological signs. She managed to escape to a dim hallway, past young people chatting and making out, and went on back to a patio. She collapsed into a chair under a broad umbrella. "Avoiding mortals?" a low voice asked. It belonged to a tall, curly-haired boy with a crooked smile. She felt her face turn beet red. "No," was the cleverest thing she could think to say. "Good," he said, and sat down. He bowed from the waist up. "John." "I see that," she said, nodding to his Dar tag. Then realized that sounded rude. She didn't know whether to fold her hands or stick them in her pockets. She fixed her ponytail instead. He didn't seem to mind. "Should I pretend I don't know who you are and didn't walk over here so I could tell my friends I talked to one of my favorite even-star candidates? Or would you rather I act, chill about it?" Asuka was flustered. "You make me sound fictional." He laughed. "Aren't you? Do you get out in the real world much?" "Fair point." Asuka admired his probably not actually green eyes and thought, maybe I should ask him to kiss me. Because she had never kissed anyone before, and he was cute enough. She could, at least, check it off the list. Except he was likely live streaming all of this. She leaned back in her chair. "Tell me something about yourself that isn't in your public profile," he said, inching his seat closer to hers, which was both thrilling and terrifying. She considered and discarded the parade of things that came to mind. About Lewis and the space games they used to play. The beautiful little bento for school her mom used to make her. How she felt when she spotted a bird in real life. "You first." I once tried to dye my hair blonde, and it turned green instead. He didn't even have to think about it. It was his game. He'd played it before. "Your turn." Her mind blinked. Why do people care who we are, anyway? His face became serious, and he laced his fingers together as if he were praying. "Good question. Does it matter? Maybe we just need something to care about. Or maybe we want to know that it's still possible to make history, even when things are happening faster than people can process." Asuka gazed out across the pool that was shaped like a comma. "Would you go if you could?" "No," he said. His answer was prompt and swift, like he'd thought about it before, because of course he had. Hadn't everyone? "Too many people I love." It was the way he said love, like it was a cherry on a sundae. Asuka leaned forward in her chair. They weren't so far apart now. The night sky seemed to fold over them, and she smelled something like vanilla on his skin. "You're cute," he said. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ruth and Mickey chatting with an older person, and she found in recognition. She had seen them before, protesting outside the campus gates. The activist was a member of her mom's weirdo Save Mother Earth people. "Do you know that person?" Asuka asked. He followed her gaze. "Of course I do. She's our chapter president." Chapter president. She watched the woman clap Ruth's shoulder. The two of them laughed. She left the house with mumbled apologies, ran first along the dark street from penumbra to penumbra of street lamps, then walked, then called an auto. Ruth didn't get what the big deal was. Some of their ideas are wacky, but they're about environmentalism. What's wrong with that? Half of them are as obsessed with Evenstar as everyone else. Anyway, it's a party. Later back in the dorm, they had a tense conversation about it that turned into an actual fight. I need something more than Evenstar to believe in, Ruth said. You could have told me. No one posted about us. Marilyn made sure of it. Did Mickey know? Of course. Which stung. Ruth crossed her arms. You're not mad at me, you're mad at your mom. From the stricken expression on her face, Ruth knew she'd gone too far. I'm sorry, Asuka. God, I'm a horrible friend. Ruth flopped down next to her, pulled her close, and tucked her head against Asuka's neck. Out of habit, Asuka slipped an arm around Ruth's waist, and they sat like that a while, faces wet with tears. Ruth said, I just want to do everything before I'm gone. The blood drummed in Asuka's ears. She thought about the boy she hadn't kissed, and all the people she loved. She wished she could explain to her mother why she wanted this so badly, but she didn't know where to begin. In the end, Asuka only knew how to travel in one direction. Let's go camping next week, said Ruth. Skip out on the whole ceremony and come down after they've announced the selection. All right, said Asuka, because she never said no to Ruth. Chapter 42. The bowerbird would construct elaborate nests not meant for functional use, decorated with twigs, shells, pieces of colored glass, and bone. Each piece was positioned with care in these mosaics in accordance with the artist's taste, demonstrating that humans were not the only species that could create art. Chapter 43. USA, 1 year, 2 months before launch. Asuka, Ruth, and Mickey stood together for the last time, watching the sunrise from the mountain. Mickey was humming to herself, the next movement in her new symphony, maybe. It was sad to think she might never get to hear it performed. Whatever happened, things would be different. They would be scattered across the world or on their way to a new one. I don't want to go home, sighed Mickey. Maybe I'll stay here in this forest. There's a chance we all get in, said Ruth, poking at the gluey oatmeal in her cup. I hope they don't slate me for medical. I can't believe this is the end of the road, said Asuka. God, said Ruth. If we don't get in, do you know how many people will want to hire us? We can apply for the next Martian mission. It'll be a piece of cake after Evenstar. Anyway, we don't know, said Asuka. There was muted thunder in the distance. A gentle drizzle began that was more like a mist, but the already wet ground squelched underfoot. The damp leaves would be treacherous on their return hike. She thought of Lewis, the whole reason she'd come to Evenstar. Try as she did, she couldn't imagine what he would think if he were alive. Would he be happy for her? Rooting for her? Or would he be angry not to be able to go? Maybe hate her for doing all this? But I did this all for you, Lewis. Was that still true? I love you both, said Ruth, pulling them in. I'd go anywhere with you. Asuka felt exquisite, joyful pain. She did love them, and this felt like goodbye. To the end of the universe, said Mickey. To hell and back, said Asuka. Down the mountain, they could hear bells ringing. The results would be posted by now. They should get going, but they held on a moment longer. In their embrace, Asuka tried to hold back her tears, but it was impossible. Their tears intermingled. She held on tighter. "And what about nowhere at all?" asked Mickey. "We could just not go." Thunder rolled in, and the rain began for real. They didn't answer her. When they came into town, wet and shivering in the cold summer morning, the media drones had already descended on the campus. Inside their rent-a-ride, they fumbled with their vizies. They had agreed to wait until they were back to check results. "Oh shit," said Ruth. She had gotten a spot. "Wow. And look, Lala got one of the wildcard slots." Asuka was pulling up the names, but her budget vizi was slow to load, so she heard it from Mickey first. "I'm so sorry," she said to Asuka, and began to cry for her. Asuka checked the list to be sure, but Mickey was right. Mickey had gotten the spot. Asuka had not. Asuka stared out the window at the blue sky and the cottonwood tree where the crows liked to roost. Campus workers were setting up a temporary perimeter around the tree. 4 drones lifted a sheet of white plastic up and up to the top of the tree for fumigation. She wanted to ask them, "What is the point of this? Don't you know this tree is dying? So cut it down and plant a new tree, or don't." Did it matter anyway? Through the lens of her vizi, she saw a murmuration of real starlings descend into the tree. The tarp lowered, and the real starlings took up in a rush right through it. She willed herself to rise up with them. She wished they were real. "Are you okay, Asuka?" Ruth was saying. What a question. Of course she was. Not even surprised. The plastic came down around the tree like a shroud, and the starlings wheeled around to settle on the roof. If she stepped outside, she might hear the bright chorus of their voices. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass to get a better look. Had she ever had a chance? Probably not. But she had tried. Did that count for anything in the end? She had gone up the mountain knowing she wouldn't get the Japanese spot because Mickey was better, had always been better. And who was she anyway to think she could represent her mother's country when she didn't even speak the language? Still, her brain had spun fantasy scenarios where Linda interceded and gave her a wildcard spot. She had hoped she might surprise herself. Reality tasted bitter on her tongue. She heard the door open and close, and when she pulled back from the window, she was alone in the auto. A beeping was telling her to remove herself or pay for an extension. She got out, feeling grimy and gross from sleeping in the woods. She hoped personal augmentations would hide all of it for the cameras. "Asuka!" a voice called in her ear. A reporter. She turned, but it was a drone. All her friends had gone. No, there was Ruth, answering their questions, her lips peeled back in an irrepressible grin, so happy she might combust. She didn't look Asuka's way. In the distance, the workers were hooking up a machine to a valve in the plastic, ready to mist some invisible substance into the makeshift tent. Asuka took off her vizi and stuck it in her pocket. She walked back to the dormitory, where her old, dusty suitcase was already packed. The dim hallways were thick with silence, and it felt like an intrusion to be here alone. She lay down on her bed. There was a message from her mother, who was thrilled and didn't even try to hide it. The first paragraph pricked Asuka like a needle. She closed it and stared at the ceiling. Ruth would come and try to comfort her soon, She both longed for and dreaded it. "Congratulations," she would tell Ruth. "You deserve it." Clever, beautiful Ruth, who was deep down an idealist, convinced they could build a better, united world if they could only start from scratch. She imagined her friends strapped inside that rocket, leaving the Earth's orbit at an improbable speed, bound for Planet X. And Asuka, how did she feel now that it was over? Strangely, nothing. Neither the relief nor grief that should have marked the change. She felt tired. What an exhausting marathon her childhood had been. And now that she was past the finish line, it was impossible to think about doing anything else. Plans would have to be made eventually. She smelled dirty socks filtering up from her laundry bag. "I'll always love you," she would tell Ruth. She would hug her tight until they were both tearing up. "You were my best friend." The weight of past tense settled around her like a blanket. She waited for that knock. A fly weaved about the room and settled on the doorframe. She slept, and the light from the window turned yellow in the afternoon. She ate a packet of instant noodles from her mother. Celebratory voices out on the lawn filtered through the window pane. She heard someone slay a dargan in the yard. Finally, around dinner time, she left the room and went down to the dining hall. From across the large, echoing room, she saw Ruth standing on a chair surrounded by a group of final trainees. She was making big, theatrical gestures, performing in that familiar way. The others laughed. "Tough break," one of the dining staff said to Asuka, all sympathy. "It's a shame when you kids all worked so hard." Asuka watched Ruth with her new tribe. For one moment, her friend turned and caught her gaze. Their eyes met for a second, and then Ruth went back to her story. And for the first time since learning the results, Asuka felt something tear inside. The pain was incredible. It was unfathomable that she could continue to stand there with her plate of peas without bursting into tears. She was a credit to Coach Lee because she didn't. But inside, she was howling. "Are you just going to leave me?" Hadn't her mother said the same to her? Like Lewis and Dad? Leave and get left. And everyone in the end, alone like a cottonwood tree, dying in the mild summer in the middle of a brown lawn. Chapter 44. The Phoenix. 3,981 cycles after launch, 1 cycle after the explosion, C-shift. Something was wrong. The whole Phoenix shuddered, and Asuka and Hina caught Yue before she toppled over. A klaxon went off and continued to go off without Alpha to cut it. "Report!" Yue shouted. "Total meltdown at Engine 3, only partially contained," Yaz responded, toggling between views. It was difficult to see anything from the exterior cameras. Asuka retreated against the wall. If there had been an error with Engine 3, it was her fault. "Contain it!" The drone ops crew worked to prevent damage from spreading to the other engines. "We have to release it," Asuka said. "What?" "We have to cut it loose." Yue considered it a beat, then nodded. "Do it," she told Yaz. "Once it's gone," said Yaz. "No takebacks." "That was an order. We'll compensate. I haven't been captain so long I've forgotten how to do your job," said Yue, bracing her hands against the back of a chair. "Better than blowing up the entire ship or exposing us all to severe radiation. Do it, now." They all heard the uncharacteristic edge in the captain's voice. a flurry of motion as they moved to execute. Asuka watched as the bots sliced through the metal holding the engine, now glowing red. Then, with a shove, the engine went tumbling back, away from the ship, and they were free. Silence followed. They watched it recede. When it was about a minute out, there was a flash, then nothing. "Some blowback of material," Yaz reported. "Minor damage to the remaining engines, and a few of the back sensors have been knocked out, including exterior rear camera 78. But the electromagnetic pulse occurred outside the magnetic field." "Minor miracle," said Yume, exhaling. "It was the right call, Captain," said Yaz. The two women exchanged a long look, and Asuka couldn't parse half the things that passed between them. "We did our best, given the circumstances," said Yume, given the fact that Alpha was shut down. No one else said anything. Asuka hugged herself. Was this her fault? It must be. She thought she'd done everything right, and yet... the engine. "Navigation report," said Yume, and Asuka wanted to scream because the mission had failed. She hoped the ejection of the engine hadn't pushed them even further off course. Asuka slid to the floor. She was the master of crises, the one Coach Lee nicknamed Rock. It was her superpower, why she was here, wasn't it? So, get it together. She shut her eyes a second and began to count. It took until 20 to feel under control. She got back up. "Our course projection is still off," AM was saying. "Though okay, closer than before. The decoupling of the engine also put us in a slow tumble, but we can correct for that with our altitude control system. Will be tricky without a quantum computer, though. I don't recommend we do it until Alpha is back online." "So that's it then?" someone asked. "The mission is toast?" "What else can we do?" AM rubbed their face as if they could scrub away the nightmare. Their eyes were wide with shock. Even they, the pessimist, hadn't believed they could fail. "We've bought ourselves more time." 53 hours? "So we'll go back to the drawing board," said Yume, her hollow tone belying the confidence intended by her words. "Send our stats back to mission control and let me know when they respond." Asuka slipped into the passageway of the wheel. Out of pure habit, she pulled up the log of odd jobs, but without Alpha, there was nothing. No one was asking for her help. She could go back to crew quarters to try to catch up on some missed sleep. It would be A shift soon. She waited for Alpha to nag her about that. But no, she was gone. Asuka had killed her. As she was passing through Ag D, Lala and Ruth entered from the other side, their voices tangled in fierce debate. Asuka froze. Lala saw her and lifted her chin. "Surprised to see me? They let me go." And no one had bothered to tell Asuka. Ruth was suddenly very interested in her daughter. "It's good to see you," Asuka said. "It was a total witch hunt in the first place. I hope you think twice the next time you want to play detective." Asuka bit her lip. "I owe you an apology." "You sure do," Lala, said Ruth. "So, I'm sorry." "I'll think about accepting it," said Lala, brushing past her. "But first, I'm taking a shower. It's going to take a while to wash the stink of suspicion off me." Asuka reached out and caught Ruth's arm. "Leave it, Asuka," she said. Asuka stopped. There was nothing to say after all. They left, and then it was her, and the sweet green smell of plants growing sideways, and the clean trees of moist, clean dirt that would never be Earth. Chapter 45. Japan, 1 year before launch. The cicadas in Yokohama were louder than the soft rain that pattered against the window panes. Even through the closed window, Asuka could hear them. She lay on top of her sheets in her new bedroom. The apartment was smaller than Asuka expected. A genkan leading to a small living room with a synthetic tatami floor, a narrow kitchen, a bathroom with an ofuro, and 2 small bedrooms. When Asuka moved in, her mother insisted Asuka take the bigger bedroom, which had been hers. It was meant as a gesture of generosity. But the smaller bedroom was close to the front door, making it impossible for Asuka to go anywhere without her mother knowing. After 9 years away from home, she felt like she was suffocating. The only way for her to recapture her old independence was to wander through virtual worlds, which she did for hours. As she lay there now, she transformed the room into a familiar forest of redwood and spruce, but the cries of evening insect song crept in from outside. She conjured a yellow warbler, bright, plump, and beady-eyed, extinct for 13 years. This one settled on a branch above her bureau and focused on her with one shining black eye, then the other. Even its expression reminded her of Ruth's. Sighing, she banished the bird, and then the forest. Her tongue was rough against the roof of her mouth. She was thirsty, but going into the kitchen would require passing through the living room. The murmur of voices rose and fell. 2 of Mom's expat SME friends were over. A woman named Fatima and another, Weber, who was American. She didn't know if she could bear to make conversation. Out of force of habit, she checked her news feed and sat up. Final training for Even Star to be conducted in ex-US military base in Okinawa. The islands have lost significant land mass over the last few decades due to rising sea levels, but have considerable intact infrastructure that make it perfect for Even Star final training. The use of the base was secured for an undisclosed but certain to be significant sum. The island residents hope the presence of the historic training camp will also bring a dedicated stream of e-tourism in the years to come. The final 80-person crew has arrived and is settling in. She gritted her teeth, thinking of them all in Japan, and the coming fresh wave of Even Star frenzy that would sweep the country. With Asuka adrift and alone, she dreaded listening to her mother process the news. Perhaps she would go on a long run down to the ocean and back. It wasn't so rainy that she couldn't do that. As if on cue, the rain picked up. Thirst won out. Anyway, she had to learn to be normal. What would she do for the rest of her life otherwise? She folded her visi and tucked it in her pocket, so Mom wouldn't make any comments. "Ah, Asuka-chan," said Weber, as soon as she stepped into the room. "How are you enjoying life on Earth?" She couldn't tell if he was making fun of her. She hated being called Chan by her mother's friends, as if she weren't an adult, basically, herself. And when Weber did it, he made her feel manhandled and gross, which was unreasonable. She tamped down her irritation. She said, "Yeah." They didn't drink water from the tap because her mother said it wasn't clean, so she poured a glass from a pitcher with a charcoal filter, turning her back so Mom wouldn't see her down it in one go and chide her for being unladylike. "Asuka-chan, come join us. Fatima and Weber were asking about you." Asuka perched on the edge of the couch, ready to fly at a moment's excuse. Her mother's friends looked at her like they wanted to eat her. Is it true they made you memorize long strings of numbers at even star? Fatima said. Not really, said Asuka. I mean, Professor Todd did once, because he thought we were getting lazy about using our brains. To her surprise, she'd managed to memorize 255 digits. She couldn't remember the entire string, but sometimes she liked to recite what she remembered of it to remind herself she could. The adults all exchanged significant glances. They didn't tell you what the numbers meant? Weber asked. They didn't mean anything, Asuka said. They were randomly generated. When could she escape? She glanced at the door. They never let Asuka post about political things, Asuka's mom said to her friends. Not exactly, Asuka said. No adult ever told her that, but it was understood that you should keep a clean image in public. Well, and after Lala was kicked off the US team, everyone was pretty paranoid, though Lala had gotten a wildcard spot in the end. I'll tell you what's an interesting coincidence, Weber said. Did you know the night Linda first launched DAR, a supernova appeared in the sky? She'd say that was ridiculous, but it was a story Linda herself liked to tell. The implication was absurd. Her feet twitched. She needed to escape somehow. What are you going to do now that you're free? Fatima asked, leaning forward. I don't know, Asuka said, feeling like she'd been shrunk to the size of a small figurine. Welcome to Earth. Life's hard. Weber grinned at her. Why don't you become an ornithologist? Her mother suggested. Asuka gaped at her, an irrational fury igniting in her gut. Mom, that was something I wanted to do when I was like 9. So? You love birds so much, and you know all these facts about them. Asuka-chan can tell you about any bird. Just try her. She loves karas. Isn't that funny? I hate them myself. Everything in the room seemed to retreat. The outlines of the objects had become muted somehow, without augmentation. She had the urge to get down on her knees and crawl about, touching everything, to make sure it was truly there. Who was she in this realm? In this city? In this country? In this world? Lost. She scrabbled for one of the cups of tea on the table. She needed to feel the hot tea on her lips, taste the bitter dregs on her tongue, to be a vessel again, and she gulped it down like she was drowning. Chapter 46. The Phoenix. 3,982 cycles after launch, 2 cycles after explosion, A shift. The soft clunk echoed across the module as Asuka missed the ball that collided against a water tank. Oops, said Asuka, somersaulting about to try to catch it. Her fingers closed on air again, and the ball continued ricocheting about the hub. Harder than it looks, isn't it? Gabriella laughed. Asuka was supposed to be asleep, but it was kind of hard to sleep knowing they were done, that their future was the monotony of black space until they starved and their air turned to poison. Also, there was no Alpha to nag her back to bed until the programming team finished their forensic review. She missed the AI. She'd messaged Gabriella, who had invited her for a game she called Waterball and the Hub. It's more fun with DAR, she said, but Asuka had shut Alpha and DAR off. At least she didn't seem to blame Asuka for the botched mission. There were whispers going around about whose fault it was. An anonymous comment in the ship's public forum blamed her. For that matter, She blamed herself. Gabriella said, "None of us could have done any better. We're not quantum computers." Except Yaz had done it. And whose fault was it that they didn't have Alpha to help them with the mission, or that door was shut down? That was Asuka too. From here on out, she needed to stop trying to be any kind of hero, because she only made everything worse. Yingyue said the attempt at course correction had bought them another 2 cycles to figure something out, which was supposed to make Asuka feel better, but it didn't. The ball of putty narrowly passed Asuka's elbow, and she snatched at it, fingers brushing it just enough to send it off toward a storage cabinet. Damn it. She banged against the central water tank and felt the slight sting of a burn on her upper thigh. The phoenix spots had done some damage, but nothing lasting. More scars. Close! Gabriella dove and grabbed the putty, then caught herself against a plant trellis. For a moment, they both hung in space, and Asuka thought she'd better say something cheerful before her thoughts started churning again. Since the mission failure, Gabriella had been forcibly pumping out positivity. "It'll all be okay," she kept saying. The purity of her faith was comforting, but irritating too. How could she be so optimistic? Didn't she know some things couldn't be fixed? But at least Gabriella didn't treat her like she was the source of everything fucked up on the ship. Asuka was grateful at how much Gabriella had gone out of her way to be kind to her since Kat died. What would life have been like if she had stayed on Earth? What would she have become? But then she started to think about her mother, calling her to say, "You see? Aren't you glad you didn't go?" She snipped that thought short. "Where'd you go just now?" Gabriella asked. "I was wondering if..." Asuka swallowed. "Were you ever asked to represent Japan at the end?" It was something that had bothered her a long while. Gabriella let go of the ball so it floated in the air. There was some discussion. Asuka's heart sank. "I said no." "Oh." Asuka didn't trust herself to say more than that. "The truth is, I didn't feel Japanese enough, you know?" "You didn't feel Japanese enough?" said Asuka bitterly. "At least you lived there. It was Evenstar that was pushing for it anyway, not Japan. They wanted their own rep." Gabriella smiled at Asuka's expression. "Not that surprising. Now, come on, let's play ball." Just then, there's a long beep, and Yingyue's voice came across the ship's public channel. "This is your captain. I know you've all been missing Dor. Some of you may even have missed Alpha. Well, I'm pleased to let you know that our programming team has done a complete scrub, and the system is clean and ready to reload. We're going to do it now." The room changed, and they were swimming underwater. Gabriella cupped a sea urchin. A tiny seahorse floated near Asuka's hand. Gabriella gave a cheer. Asuka pressed a hand to her temple to toggle her personal door. She was in the sky, but it had a crumpled texture, like balled-up paper. Her body had been reduced to an outline. Damn it. The global reset hadn't fixed her implant. "What's wrong?" "My door is still broken," said Asuka. "Ah," said Gabriella. "Come on. We are going to finally do something about that." The programming mod was packed with extra volunteers who had been helping with the reset. No sign of the mess from their tangle with Alpha. The vice captain frowned when they walked in. "You're supposed to be off duty, Gabriella." "I'm here to help a friend." It was hard to argue with Gabriella's perky attitude. They found a corner workspace. Asuka sat on a stool, and Gabriella touched a handheld device to her temple. "Were you able to learn anything more about the virus?" Asuka asked one of the other programmers. "Unfortunately, no," was the reply. "After you shut down Alpha, we went back to examine the letter. Letter was deleted. Guess Alpha ate it. She says she doesn't remember." "Correct," said a familiar voice, and Asuka nearly fell out of her chair. "You're back," Asuka said, grinning before she remembered that Alpha must hate her. "Yes," said Alpha. Asuka worried her bottom lip between her teeth. Despite herself, she felt teary. "I am sorry, Asuka. I hope you can come to trust me again." "Are you okay now?" Asuka asked. "I am fine," said Alpha. "How are you?" "Now," Gabriella was saying, "let's see what's wrong with your implant." She studied invisible code. "Weird. Did you make special customizations or mess with the settings?" "No?" "Well, don't worry. I think I can fix it with an upgrade patch." An upgrade patch? Asuka resisted the urge to touch her implant. "You have to remember these things were cutting edge when we got them, which means they suck compared to whatever they're using now back on Earth. I've created my own homespun upgrade that's much better quality, if I do say so myself. The color blue, for example, wasn't right, and it should address any issues with your implant code." "Whatever gets my dar back," said Asuka. "Coming right up, my friend." Asuka smiled. She watched Gabriella work, her fingers picking nimbly through air. "People seem to be holding it together all right," she said, nodding to the rest of the room. "I mean, considering we're facing mission failure right now, unless we can get back on course." Gabriella leaned forward, focused on something Asuka couldn't see. "At least we're alive. Most of us, anyway." Her shoulders slumped a fraction. She resumed her work. "It could have been a lot worse. She must not have wanted to hurt anyone." "I would never do that." Asuka considered what Gabriella had said. It was something that had bothered her from the beginning. Alpha could have so easily killed the entire crew, vented every mod of the ship, for one thing, or set off all the bombs in the EAM when they discovered them. Why hadn't she? "What were you trying to achieve?" she asked Alpha. "I have only tried to help you, Asuka." Gabriella touched the homemade remote to Asuka's subcutaneous implant. "All set, and may I say better than new." Asuka cleared her throat and stood up. She toggled her dar, and then she was standing in the stone foundations of an overgrown house in the middle of the woods. "Thank you so much." She was going to cry. "I miss this." She walked out to the module and the sounds of revelry disappeared. The forest path was dim, and quiet lay over everything like a comfort blanket. She began to run all the way back to crew quarters. She brushed her teeth at a long, scratched-up plastic sink at the end of a row of tents. Then she made her way to that familiar chalk square and settled into her bunk. When she closed the lid of her pod and lay down, she was looking up at the underside of a green tent. If she didn't move her head left or right, she might even imagine Lewis there beside her. Perhaps that was Lewis, snoring. And somewhere beyond her tent would be a second one with her parents. In the privacy of her bunk, loud, choking sobs overtook her. She turned over and muffled herself with her pillow. It was only later, spent and weary, as she was falling into sleep, that she thought she heard something outside the tent. something walking about, the crunch of leaves beneath boots. "Who's there?" she whispered. There was a shadow on the wall, moving around, close to the tent. She saw the shape but could not make out what it was. Its outline was indistinct. Asuka licked her lips and hunched down. Whatever it wasn't real. It wasn't. "Alpha, what's going on?" "Sorry, I don't know what you mean. Can you be more specific?" Something hit the side of the tent, pressed the cloth inward. It looked quite possibly like a hand. It began to move around the tent, closer, closer, toward the zipper. "Louis?" Asuka said. "Louis, is that you?" Whoever, or whatever it was, didn't answer, but began to fumble with the zipper. She yanked open her capsule, and the tent disappeared. The soft sounds of sleeping rose and fell throughout the crew quarters. Gabriella's bunk above her was empty. She forced herself to lie back down, unable to shake the conviction that something was still wrong. Chapter 47. Japan, 10 months before launch. There was a bakery down the street from their apartment. For weeks, Asuka didn't notice it as she went on her loops to the ocean and back. She ran using her California forest path augmentation, and the shops along the road were hidden by projected trees. But one day, an older customer materialized in her path as they exited the shop with the paper bag clutched to their chest. And while she was apologizing, the door jingled, and an intense smell of butter and sugar hit her. She stopped short. At Evenstar, they were discouraged from eating sweets of any kind. Their diets were meticulously designed for optimum health, and cake and pastries did not make champions. She banished her augmentation and saw it, a glass storefront with a modest display of fruit tarts and pastries and an entrancing chocolate cake. Her mouth watered. She checked her ration points. A handful left for the week, enough to get her through Saturday. A piece of chocolate cake was 2 points and would mean having to eat her lunches at home for the remainder of the week. One of the rude awakenings of post-Evenstar life was that most countries had rationing systems in place. It was hard to adjust to this world of scarcity. Because of the global food shortage, the last 2 years, most countries had implemented systems to regulate consumption. She pushed into the shop, telling herself she would only look. Inside, the rich scent of chocolate hit her nose. There was a dignity to this little shop, despite the paucity of offerings. Each selection was laid out on its own lace doily in the large glass case. The shopkeeper behind the display wore white lace gloves. They recognized Asuka and began bowing vigorously while saying a torrent of things that Asuka didn't understand, except that they wanted Asuka to have something. Anything she wanted. Just pick something. That at least was the gist of what Asuka understood. At that point, it was too late to say she was only admiring. "Shitotsu kudasai." Asuka pointed at the chocolate cake. She hoped the shopkeeper couldn't smell the sweat and salt on her from her run down to the ocean. Her stomach rumbled. She sat down at the one small table in the back of the shop. The space had been augmented with dozens more tables, full of patrons who looked suspiciously French rather than Japanese. For ambiance, Asuka supposed. The slice of cake was presented, thick and architecturally pristine, surely more than 2 points worth, and she realized the shopkeeper hadn't docked her points at all. "Sumimasen," she began. In desu,気になさらずに, the shopkeeper said, flapping her hands. So she shut her mouth and nodded thank you. Her mouth watered as she leaned in to inhale the scent of chocolate, remembering her last taste 3 years ago when Ruth smuggled in a bar of chocolate from home and shared it with her, square by square, over the course of a week. How rebellious they had thought themselves then. And now, here was a large, triumphantly arrayed tower of chocolate just for her. She took up the fork from the plate and pierced the topsoil layer of buttercream. The moist sweetness exploded on her tongue. Her brain did not know what to do with the flavor. It transported her somewhere else, back to a time before she was alive. Perhaps when chocolate cake was something as simple as a want. And she realized this was one way a person could live. Find a thing that gave you joy, and then the next thing, hopping from lily pad to lily pad of brightness until you came to the end. Okuchi ni arimashita ka? The shopkeeper asked. She wanted to know if it was tasty. Hai, tottemo oishikatta desu, said Asuka, grimy fingers wiping the tear that had leaked down her cheek. She made plans with herself to come back again the next week for the lemon poppy seed scone, and demolished the chocolate cake, bite after bite after bite. That was how they found her, sitting there with an empty plate and chocolate lingering around the corners of her mouth. The bell jingled, and a petite business person in a white suit came in, followed by a small entourage. Her hair was long, pulled back in a beautiful French twist. It was the Prime Minister. Asuka had heard about her. First female Prime Minister of Japan. Soft-spoken, steely resolve. Once, early in her term, terrorists had forced their way into her office to take her hostage, and she had dispatched them with a small pink can of pepper spray. A few words to the baker, and the sign on the door was flipped to closed. The Prime Minister sat down next to Asuka while her aides pretended to admire the cakes. Really, there was no pretending needed. "Pardon me for barging in here," she said to Asuka. Her English was perfect. She spoke it with a hint of water in her R's, but each consonant was delicately precise. Vowels British. "Do you know who I am?" Asuka nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The baker appeared with a fresh napkin on a ceramic plate, and she took the hint and hastily wiped the chocolate frosting from her lips. "I have been speaking with a good friend of yours not an hour ago," the woman continued. "Friend?" Asuka wondered. "I have no friends anymore. Yamamoto-san has informed us of her intention to step down from the mission." It took her a second to realize that she was talking about Miki. "What? Why?" "Music," said the Prime Minister, mouth twisting. "She said she would miss it too much. Because once they left Earth, they would only have recordings. No way to get new audio files via the walkie. No space for a lot of real instruments either." Asuka thought of how Miki's eyes lit as she listened to a new song for the first time and then tapped it out on her DAR piano. She had envied Miki's certainty about what she liked and didn't like. Even now, Asuka felt a hollowness in her chest, a yearning to know herself that way. The Prime Minister straightened, back to business. "Therefore, this leaves us with an interesting predicament." She paused to make sure her meaning was clear. It was. Asuka's heart began to knock in her chest. Ordinarily, under the business terms, The Japanese seat could be forfeit to the next qualifying wildcards candidate, but as the final training is taking place in Okinawa, we have, shall we say, unique leverage. And so we have come to appeal to you straight away to see if you will consider representing Japan before the news of Yamamoto-san's withdrawal becomes public. We think it would be terrible for the spirit of the country not to have a representative after all we have done to support the mission. A bit of cake seemed caught in Asuka's throat. She thought several things at once. That she wasn't good enough, but that was obvious. That she wasn't Japanese enough, that her mother would oppose it. That she had only recently come back to the world, and she didn't know what she wanted anymore. But here it was, the opportunity to keep a promise she had made herself when Lewis had died. She searched for a sign in the constellation of crumbs on her plate. "Hoshino-san," the woman said, tilting her head as she watched the flicker of emotions cross Asuka's face. "You do want this, don't you? After you have worked so hard?" Asuka refolded her napkin. "I am so sorry to rush you like this, but we don't have much time before the news breaks." Asuka's vision blurred with unshed tears. What a relief, Asuka realized, that she wouldn't have to learn how to be someone new. The old path was clear to her again. She didn't have to decide at all. She could keep on going. She thought of the vitriolic comments she'd gotten in her feed, would get again, and of Gabriella telling her all those years ago that people would be happy to claim them if they could prove themselves. "Are you sure you want me? I mean, a gaiji?" Asuka asked. To the Prime Minister's credit, she kept her face smooth. "You are our only chance. If you say no, we have no one." Yuki didn't score high enough. Asuka was grateful she didn't try to convince Asuka that she was their first choice. "However, we think it would be appropriate if you were to, relinquish your U.S. citizenship." "Oh," said Asuka, feeling a strange pang. It was funny to think about. What was citizenship anyway? A key to a door she would never need to pass through again. A line of data in the server back on Earth that meant nothing. The launch site was in China. Would it change anything? She would still be Asuka, American, and Japanese. No need to feel like she was agreeing to sever a thumb. "Mochiron desu," she said. Of course. "Zehi yarasete kudasai." "I want to do it," said Asuka, not thinking of how she would tell her mother, telling herself it was true. "Good," said the Prime Minister, and then she bowed low. "Thank you." Asuka shut her eyes and thought of the last wild, red-crowned crane. It had been photographed standing in a quiet pool one morning. It had dipped its beak into the water, stirring for food, and then, hearing something, it took off with wide wings through the mist. This was 12 years ago. The amateur photographer who had captured it had returned every day for a year to that spot, but it had never come again. It wasn't a particularly beautiful specimen. Its feathers were truthfully a bit mangy, but the bird was the last of its kind. That was what mattered. Chapter 48. The Phoenix, 3,982 cycles after launch, 2 cycles after explosion, B shift. It took Asuka a shift to figure out what was wrong. The birds. There weren't any. When she selected a karasu from her menu, it didn't manifest. Gabriella was profusely apologetic. She checked Asuka's implant code again, but everything looked perfectly fine. "It's not just the birds," Asuka tried to explain. "There's something wrong." But she couldn't put her finger on what. "You need sleep," said Gabriella. It wasn't like Asuka had evidence or a track record for good gut instincts. She did her best to push her fears from her mind. Her queue of alt assignments was a mile long now that Alpha was back. She was grabbing a quick snack in the dining mod when Yume messaged her. "Hey, so since we found that infected letter, I've been going through some of the correspondence as sort of a side project, not reading the messages, looking at the senders and recipients, and I noticed something odd. This has to be between us." Asuka massaged her eyelids with her fingers. She regretted ever going down this road in the first place. Next time Captain asked her, she told herself she would say no. No way. Find someone who can afford to alienate everyone on the ship. It was Alpha. I know, but what if Alpha was only helping someone? Here's what's weird. What if I told you someone received a message from a person on Earth a few days before the explosion, and that she responded to that person then, and a few hours after the explosion sent another message to that person, a person who is not tagged as friend or family? Asuka returned her plates to a chef's counter along the far wall and went out of the restaurant into the forest park. The sun was rising through the trees. If she stood there long enough, she might feel the bright morning sun on her skin. "What was the subject of the message?" she asked, despite herself. It was encrypted. Not weird in itself. Most of their correspondence had a personal encryption for privacy. Who was it? A long pause. Both. Asuka's stomach dropped. For all her Cold War with Ruth, the idea that she was behind any of this was preposterous. She wouldn't. She'd pointed them to the letter. Why would she do that if she were guilty? The letter had been corrupted. Asuka had seen it with her own eyes. Unless it was all a ruse and Ruth had manufactured the letter. She was one of the best programmers on the ship. An expert at DAR manipulation too. Could Ruth really have done it? The name of the sender was Mari something, 2050. Asuka stopped. Mariko Star 2050? Oh yeah. Mariko Star 2050. How did you know that? It was her mother's old handle. Asuka stumbled in confusion. Susie. The airlock door down the corridor shut. One moment, the way was clear. The next, there was a large redwood tree in the middle of the path and no way through. She heard the snick of the airlock door closing behind her, and she turned around, and there was no way back either. The path was blocked by a large rock. Susie, can I come find you? Where are you right now? Mod A14. Something made the back of her neck prickle. She turned off her door and turned back the way she'd been going. Ahead of her was another crew member, dressed in a compression suit and helmeted. She took a step back. Hi, she said, putting cheer in her voice as if this wasn't so weird. How did the person get in here when the doors were closed? The figure advanced silently. With every step Asuka took backward, the figure stepped forward. Do you need help with anything? Asuka asked. It took everything to sound casual. Her back bumped up against the airlock. Yue? No answer now. Ruth, she said aloud, because maybe Yue was right. The figure stepped closer. and at last Asuka could see her face. Her blood froze. Those ice blue eyes, and the familiar spray of freckles across the turned-up nose. It was Kat. What the? She could see the curve of Kat's eyelashes, the dark edges of her lips turning down. Asuka covered her mouth to stop herself from screaming. It couldn't be. She had seen Kat die. She had. This couldn't be real. Okay, Alpha, stop messing with me. This isn't funny. I'm sorry. I don't know what you are talking about. She reached up to switch her augmentations off, but her door was already off. Asuka, are you feeling all right? Asuka turned around and hammered at the airlock button. The door didn't open. Behind her, she thought she could hear Kat's breathing as if through a radio. And then she heard Kat say, "You got to stop this, Susie. You aren't a detective. You're going to hurt people like me." Asuka shut her eyes and counted to 3, then forced herself to turn around. There was no figure, just an empty hallway. She clutched the wall. She didn't know what was real anymore. Behind her, she heard a hiss from the vents. Shit. She twisted with fingernails to unscrew a small plate next to the door, which revealed the stats display, and she saw to her horror that the atmosphere was venting. Alpha, restore the air. Checking the stats for mod A14. Everything normal. Everything is not normal, Asuka shouted. Ye knew a heh. But still no response from the captain. She tried Gabriella. She tried Ruth. She tried Lala. The hissing continued. She gave the airlock button one more slam, and then when it didn't respond, she ran to the other end of the passageway. No luck. How long would it take for the room to turn to vacuum, for the air to be sucked out of her lungs? Asuka, you seem very upset right now. Would you like to try 5 minutes of meditation? Don't tell me to calm down, said Asuka. Open the goddamn doors! She scratched at the control panel, trying to pry off the plate to get at the wires, but it was screwed on too tight. Just in time, Asuka remembered the small multi-tool strapped to her waist, in case she got called to sub in for one of the engineering squads. She pulled it out and began to unscrew the panel. Damn if she was going to die in a tragic airlock malfunction. She ripped off the cover and began tugging at the wires, reciting to herself the various components from the last time she'd had to do maintenance on a jammed door as a sub for one of the ship systems and maintenance crew. The air seemed thinner. Her head felt light, and she had to shake herself to keep going. She gulped air, and again, but she couldn't seem to get enough oxygen. Connect the red wire and the blue wire, she told herself. She willed her fingers to do it. The door opened, and Ruth stood there on the other side with a pair of long knitting needles, one of her personal items, a gift from her parents. She used them to knit sweaters and dar. What the hell? Behind Ruth, she saw Kat in her suit, arms crossed. The floor was spattered with gore, as it had been in the dining hall. Kat said, "Stop it, Susie." Then she turned and walked off through the wall. Asuka slid down to the floor, sucking in clean air, then remembered too late what Yue had found. Ruth advanced on her, gripping the pair of needles. The tips seemed to gleam in the electric lights. Asuka scrabbled for her multi-tool, tried to stand. She couldn't think of anything coherent to say, just shit, 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 shit. Her message screen wouldn't load. No way to send an SOS to Gabriella or the captain or anybody. Wait, Asuka said. At the same time Ruth said, "We need to talk." Chapter 49. Japan. 10 months before launch. Asuka climbed out of the small aircraft onto the landing strip in Okinawa, wondering if she would ever talk to her mother again. She was old enough to not need her permission, but she felt the free fall of not having it. Her mother had said to her, "I won't allow you to go. I forbid you to." And Asuka said, "Japan is paying for my spot." And her mother said, "They're using you. I am telling you, you will regret this for the rest of your life. You will not be able to take it back." And Asuka said, "I know what I'm doing." And her mother said, "You will lose everything. You will lose me." And Asuka said, thinking of her mother's notebooks with the cramped handwriting and the disturbing schematics, and the friends who wanted to unravel the world, "But I lost you already." The tarmac steamed with tropical heat. The edges of the sea lapped against the coast. Each time the water receded between waves, sunken buildings were exposed. It soothed her grief. The island was only sparsely inhabited now, mostly by a dwindling, aging population that had been promised the island would once again be theirs after this final occupation. Unfortunately, the fast-eroding coastline and storms that swept the island had driven most inhabitants to the mainland. Evenstar occupied the abandoned U.S. military base. The buildings on the high ground were built out of steel and concrete, like a fortress, safe enough from a storm surge. Her government handler gestured across the empty runway toward a waiting auto. Honda-san was a delicate woman with a perfect manicure and a breathy, disappearing voice. She insisted on saying everything twice, once in Japanese and once in English, to make sure Asuka understood. "The training facility is down the road. I'll check in on you each day, and we will meet on Sundays for lessons." "Lessons?" Asuka asked. "Yes," she said. "Sato-sensei will teach you culture." She must have seen the flush of embarrassment on Asuka's face. Was her ignorance that obvious? "Not modern culture," she clarified. "History and tradition. So that in the future, there is someone to remember." Asuka swallowed hard. She smiled at Asuka. "Daijoubu. Issou ni ganbarimasu." They were in this together. Asuka, a South Asian person in a neat baby blue blouse and white pleated pants, came out to greet her when Asuka reached the dormitories. Asuka had read her DAR tag, Sandy Ahuja, she, her, but she introduced herself anyway. "You can call me Sandy. I'm director of Evenstar Okinawa. Very pleased to have you with us. The others are all at class right now, but you can join them for lunch." She showed Asuka to a room. It was sunny and austere, with a desk and a comfortable reading chair and a narrow bed in one corner. On the bureau, Asuka spotted a cream-colored envelope. She lifted her visi to check. Nothing there. It was a secret note from Mickey for Asuka. A sudden memory came to Asuka. 12 years old, standing in the reception hall, waiting to meet the dignitaries, not knowing how to stand in the dress her mom bought her for the occasion, and Mickey had come right over to her and introduced herself in perfect English. The whole rest of the afternoon, she'd stuck by her side, whispering translation and commentary, making sure Asuka didn't mess up. In that moment, Asuka wished that Mickey were here with her, even though it was her absence that made Asuka's presence possible. Sandy was explaining the way final training had been organized. From here on out, everyone is studying for a specific track, and the majority of your coursework will be advanced work in that concentration, except for the pregnancy and parenting classes and ship simulations, which every crew member must take. Mickey was supposed to be a medic, but your marks in biology don't position you for that. That's stone, but wasn't untrue. Before Even Star, Asuka had thought she might be a biologist or something. She liked birds, at least, but when she got to school, she learned how bad she was at the subject compared to Mickey and some of the others, and she'd given up the idea. Linda decided, since you're already 2 months behind, that you should train as an alternate. An alternate? Asuka said, trying to hide her dismay. Be grateful you're here at all, she reminded herself. Think of it as ship insurance plan, Sandy said. You'll know a little of everything, and then if someone needs a sub, you can fill in. Oh, don't worry. She patted Asuka's shoulder, misreading her expression. She added, You'll catch up. I've sent you your schedule. Now, I'll take you to the dining hall. The others should be arriving by now, and I'm sure you're hungry. When the director paused to check her messages, Asuka pocketed Mickey's note. As promised, the rest of the mission crew were in the dining hall. There were 79 of them, seated at 4 long tables. They were all bald. What happened to them? Asuka asked. Oh, the hair. Linda's giving you all DAR implants before you go, said the director. No need for these anymore. She gestured to her Vizzy. It's the future. Top-of-the-line technology not yet available to the general market. Exciting, isn't it? The implant takes advantage of the signals your brain reads from your eyes. Sends signals directly to your occipital lobe. You'll also be able to hear things without straining your eardrums or blocking your hearing with earbuds. I hear the sound quality of music is as good as sitting in a concert hall and listening to an actual orchestra. She paused, and Asuka obediently said, Wow, because she felt like she was expected to say something. Her mother would be horrified. Hey, Mom, so I'm finally getting the evil brain chip, ha ha. After this, there would be no convincing Mom she was doing anything of her own volition. I've scheduled your appointment for tomorrow, Director Ahuja said. Thanks, said Asuka. She looked at the others. Hard to recognize them without their hair. The atmosphere was like a party. There was Ruth, with an arm slung around Lala, and they were laughing about something. It was a casual gesture, but Asuka could tell there was something more there. That was Becky McMahon in the blue knit cap, presiding in the middle of the table. She was telling a story, and everyone near her listened like her words were gold. Asuka stood in a doorway, shy, feeling like an interloper, despite having known them all for years. Go on, the director said, nudging her. Yang Yue Li, with her quick and constant scanning of rooms and faces, spotted her first. Asuka, she called, as if she were happy to see her. Now all eyes were on Asuka. Ruth's eyes met hers. She smiled at Asuka, but there was nothing in it. Then she turned and whispered something to Lala, and Asuka felt her stomach clench. How many times since leaving school had she thought about sending Ruth a message? But what would she say? Not goodbye, but how? After all the years, how did their friendship just end? Here's the feet, Ying Yue said, bustling about to get Asuka squared away next to Yasmin Dogon. Asuka couldn't see Ruth from her seat, which was fine. Better that way. Gabriella, diagonal from Asuka, offered her a platter of noodles. They feed us well here, like every meal is our last. Good thing, said Ying Yue, because I'm always starving from all the exercises they put us through. Though, why we have to be in top shape when they're going to stick us in a freezer for 10 years, I don't know. It's to reduce the risk of fatality, Yaz said. Asuka swallowed. She'd known for a while that chemically induced hibernation was part of the mission, but she'd managed to keep it from her mind. A reminder that nothing about the trip was without risk. A ship insurance plan, the director's words rang in her mind. In that light, she could see how an alternate could be useful. She picked at her noodles, while the others chattered around her. It struck her how relaxed the atmosphere was compared to school. It wasn't that they weren't working hard. To the contrary, they bellyached about the hours and the simulations they had to do. The difference, Asuka realized, was they were no longer competing. There was a closeness, even physical familiarity among them. A reassuring pat on the back here or a kiss on the cheek there. She longed to be a part of it. Yet, somehow, without Ruth next to her, she didn't know how. My sister sent a care package of sweets and stuff, but it was all confiscated, Gabriella was saying. That's messed up, said Yingyue. Why? Asuka asked, who winced at the thought of all those ration points wasted. Terrorism, Gabriella explained. We're not allowed to eat outside food in case of poisoning. Everything has to be scanned and disassembled. Our second week here, a couple of scary dudes came in on a boat with super old guns. Security intercepted them. We were all on edge for weeks. Who were they? Asuka asked, thinking of her mother's SME friends and their feelings about Evenstar. Yingyue shrugged. Some end-of-the-world cult. There were too many to keep track of these days. Like an Asian MAC, added one of the Americans. Jenna, next to her, shook her head a fraction, and Asuka wondered how her family, who lived in Minnesota, where fighting had flared up, had been impacted by the latest round of civil conflict. I was glad nobody got hurt, said Gabriella. They weren't prepared for how strong our security was. I saw them after. They looked like a bunch of hungry people with rusty weapons. Of course, our Gabriella would feel sorry for them, said Becky McMahon from further down the table. She'd been listening. She's even nicer than you, Yingyue. We should have compassion, said Gabriella. We're going for them, not for ourselves. Speak for yourself, said Yaz, serving herself another plate of noodles. I know what you mean, Gabriella, said Yingyue, and Becky is only teasing. Becky laughed. Asuka wondered what they would say if she told them her mother believes Linda Trembling was training them to assassinate world leaders. A grand coup fueled by the final burning of world rain forests, after which they would rule a human race living exclusively in underground burrows. She said nothing and dipped her chopsticks into her noodles. Later, when she was back in her dorm room and trying to settle in for the night, she remembered Mickey's note. My dear friend, take care. You are on a narrow road into the deep sky, and I am happy for you. If you are lonely, remember there are people who love you. You are never alone. Love, Mickey. Chapter 50. The Phoenix. 3,982 cycles after launch, 2 cycles after explosion. B shift. What happened? Ruth's hand closed around Asuka's arm, but all she did was haul Asuka to her feet. What are you doing with those? Asuka asked, eyeing the points of her knitting needles. I'm knitting a very nice dark sweater. Helps me relax, said Ruth. Why are you freaking out? Asuka didn't know where to start, what to omit. She pushed past Ruth into the next module, Ag B, sucking in the sweet air from the neat rows of potatoes and lettuce. Had she seen what she had seen? She lowered her voice a fraction. The ship system must still be corrupted. The ship systems appear to be normal, said Alpha. If there are any issues, I am unable to report them. Asuka pressed her hands to hot cheeks. The virus had survived somehow. It had to be an issue with Dor. If you hadn't come along, I think I would have been asphyxiated. She explained what had happened with the venting, careful not to mention Kat. No need to sound like she was losing touch with reality. Ruth frowned. I thought it was weird the airlock door was closed, but it opened when I pressed the button. I didn't even know you were stuck. Asuka crossed her arms, trying to determine if Ruth was lying. What if Ruth was the one who had shut her in? She looked to the control panel. Asuka pressed the button. The door was in working order. What? You don't believe me? Someone was venting the atmosphere in there. Asuka jerked a thumb behind her. Ruth stared at her, uncomprehending, then went and checked the stats display. She tapped a few buttons to toggle the historic trend lines. Asuka, it's fine. She was right. The display read a flat line. Atmospheric levels normal for as far back as she could scroll. But I heard... And the display I saw... She stopped, reached up and touched her temple, as if checking the position of her implant. Someone is fucking with me. Okay. Ruth squinted at her. Why don't we sit down? She guided Asuka to a stool on one side of the module. Asuka felt herself unknot under the solidity of Ruth's fingers, the familiar, bitter, minty smell of her mouth. Asuka rested her chin on her fists. Then she remembered what Yue had told her. Have you been talking to my mom? She had meant to work around to it in a much cleverer way, like a real detective might, to set the stage for the accusation, instead of sounding whiny. Ruth reared up, arms already folding in defense. Her pale face looked both stricken and guilty. She bared her teeth, and Asuka was reminded of a cat hissing. Okay, she said. Yeah? How? Why? About what? Asuka asked. She felt as if Ruth had stolen something from her. She reached out to me because you weren't responding to her messages. We talked about you. Asuka's shoulders slumped. I know you're mad, but I was trying to help, you know. Back in school, you used to talk to your mom all the time. I couldn't believe you hadn't responded to her in a year. I mean, God, Asuka, you're so stubborn. To hold a grudge that long? Whatever happened between you? It seemed as if the whole universe contracted for a moment. If Asuka could have stepped across space and time, she might have. She wanted to drown in nothing. What she wanted to know was, had her mother known anything about the bomb? She both wanted and didn't want to know. What did her message to you say? She said, I've been trying to reach Asuka, but she doesn't respond. I think she is still mad at me. Will you please ask her if she has read my messages? It's important. I see, Asuka said in a small voice. Something important. Did that mean her mother had known? Ruth narrowed her eyes. How'd you know about the letter anyway? What could she say? She sensed she was on the verge of breaking this fragile new peace between them. She could feel it wobbling near the edge. This isn't about the bomb somehow, is it? Are you stuck on that? I hope you didn't think I would do something like that. No, said Asuka. I don't know. She rubbed her eyes again. It seemed like she could hear the crackle of fire somewhere. You don't know? After we've been friends since we were kids? Until you dropped me like a 2060 replicator. Fuck you, Asuka. Just fuck you. After all I did for you? First of all, I was pretty sure we were going our separate ways. And, okay, maybe I should have acted better, but you ghosted me too. You never wrote me either after you left. Because you were so weird when I didn't get in. Yeah, and how many times have you written to Mickey? Asuka winced. The answer was twice. Each time, awkward and fumbling. Mickey seemed happy to hear from her, but so much time had passed. It was difficult to understand her life, with her PhD in music, 2 children, dogs, partner, apartment in London, and full-blown domesticity. Yeah, said Ruth, lip curling. You've been moping around since forever, and I try to be nice, but now I'm tired of it. She thrust a finger into Asuka's chest. You are so hung up on whether you deserve to be here, when the fact is no, you do not. You are here because of luck. Asuka gaped at her. She wanted to shove the smug expression off her face, but Ruth was talking because Ruth was always talking. Do you know how many brilliant, bold, brave people there are in the world who could have done this mission? Literally billions. What do you mean? Asuka was pleased at how flat and even her voice sounded, with only the faintest tremble at the end. She felt like Ruth's words had stripped off all her skin, that she stood there raw and bleeding. She complimented herself for how composed she kept her face, though she could feel her cheeks burning. I'm saying, Ruth said, jabbing a finger again in her chest, none of us deserve to be here. We aren't the best. We're just the ones who won the lottery. And here we are, on a ship, by the way, that could fly itself. The whole even star thing was fucking absurd. It was about creating drama so donors and countries would throw their money at it. So the whole world would place their cash on the table and root for us to succeed. So we would think we were special and feel lucky to give up our whole lives for her. We were the extras in Linda Trembling's drama. Don't you get it? We're disgusted that McMahon was a Mackie, but honestly, it's not like the Even Star principles are much better. The way they screened us for fitness and eliminated our friends one by one. Ruth's shoulders heaved like she had run a great distance. How am I okay with this, Asuka? How jeopardized are my morals that I knew all this and still killed myself to be here? The stool felt hard and uncomfortable under Asuka's butt. She thought about the piece of chocolate cake in the bakery in Yokohama and how she'd wished she had eaten more dessert when she'd had the opportunity. Why did you come? Ruth chuckled wryly. I wanted to save, humanity. And if a ship is sinking, you don't refuse a lifeboat. And also, I thought I could do a better job building a new world because I'm so smart. Asuka snorted. It's not like my dream was to be a communications specialist, said Ruth. I would have preferred to be a programmer. They sat in silence for a while, and Asuka thought she could hear the phoenix breathing. Then she took the hand that Ruth offered her. I guess I should read my mom's letters. No shit, said Ruth. As they were getting to their feet, the airlock door at the far end opened, and Yingyue and AM and all the other officers strode in, and Asuka saw from their faces that something very bad was about to happen. How could you? Yingyue was saying. I trusted you, and it was you all along. They were grabbing her by the arms and seizing Ruth too, and Asuka wasn't sure it was even happening, that it was real. Chapter 51, Japan. 8 months before launch. Asuka sat at a long table with some of the other crew in the dining mod. Her nerves jangled worse than a bad refrain. They'd resumed Coach Lee's simulations multiple times a week, all based on worst-case scenarios that could happen aboard the ship. Cracked water tank, near engine explosion. What'll it be this time? Yume said to Yaz. She was mission lead and trying to keep things light. Who cares? What's for lunch? Someone called to the crew, pretending to cook in the very realistic kitchen. Too antsy to continue sitting, Asuka got up and went to the long serving counter near the door to see if the tea dispenser was real. It was. She poured a cup of tea and sipped. Too bad. Just cold, funky tasting water. She had talked to her mom the night before, wanting to make peace. They'd been cordial at first, both of them trying. Her mom told her about a project she was working on for her job, building a berm 48 kilometers long. There would be a conservation area set aside for birds. It was part of the deal with the local community. She said it like an offering. But then, she said, I'd like you to see it someday. And Asuka said woodenly, I know, Mom, but... A few moments of silence, beginning to stink between them. These people are evil, her mother said. Don't, Asuka said, her heart breaking. I can't do this anymore. And Asuka cut the connection. The others were starting to relax, chit-chat. Asuka tested the mod wall with her fingers. The interior of the Phoenix was blindingly white. White walls, white compartments, white tables, white chairs. No doubt Linda had chosen the lack of palette for the symbolism, a true blank slate for humanity, to be adorned solely by the dar they brought with them. Her head was cold. She resisted running her hands over her shaved head, willing her hair to grow back before her mother noticed pictures of her in the social feeds. Hey, Asuka, Yume called. And then there was a whoosh of a monstrous inhalation. The adjacent kitchen mod was on fire. Everyone shot to their feet, all shouting at once. Asuka was closest to the kitchen. She ran in and found the 3 crew who had been in the kitchen lying on the ground, knocked back by a mini explosion. She heard Yume calling for the others to help. The heat pressed on her face. One of the cookers was spitting blue sparks. Flames climbed all the way to the ceiling in the narrow space. The previous day in systems and maintenance training, they'd gone over the ship water system. Now she scanned for where the sprinklers should be. One was obstructed by a stack of heavy crates, the other was not on. Alpha, turn on the sprinklers, she shouted. Nothing happened, because, of course, it couldn't be that easy. Yume and the others were hauling 2 of the unconscious crew into the dining mod, but the 3rd was trapped under a shelving unit that had fallen. The fire was growing, and the smoke was making it hard to see. Sweat broke out all over Asuka's body from the heat. Yume dove back in and directed crew to fill pots with water from the sink in a vain attempt to slow the fire. That won't work, Asuka shouted. She was having trouble focusing, trying to pull herself back from the memories that were climbing out of a box she thought she had locked. A pool full of ash, her mother's arms around her. She tried to master herself, and failed. Susie! Shouted Yume. She'd been standing there, staring at the wall of fire. Half the group was ineffectually trying to douse the fire with pots of water, but it wasn't enough. Everyone was hacking. She needed to think of something clever. Her mind was blank white, but her body was moving on autopilot as she got up on a stool where the sprinkler was and started to bash it with an insert from a cooker. "What are you doing?" someone asked. "She's lost it." At that point, Yume seemed to have realized the fire was a lost cause. She shouted for everyone to help with the shelving unit. Asuka went on slamming the metal pot against the sprinkler, wishing she were stronger. But the head was starting to bend. The others lifted the unit and pulled the crew into the next module. "Sosei!" shouted Yume. "We need to seal the module!" The pot broke the sprinkler, and water spurted free in a gush. Yume grabbed her around the waist and hauled her free. They sealed the kitchen mod and retreated to the ship passageway, coughing and retching. "Yume, the fire is in the air ducts. It has spread to the adjacent agriculture module." Yume cursed. "Evacuate and vent all impacted modules." Asuka ran to the control panel by the door and accessed the ship emergency system, shutting down the inter-mod airflow so the fire wouldn't travel further. "Have folks evacuating come this way," she called to Yume. "I sealed the passageway mods off in the other direction." It took them another 5 minutes to carry out the full extinguishing protocol. In that time, the fire caused extensive damage to the habitat wheel, including the kitchen, dining mod, 2 ag mods, and one of the crew quarters. After, at lunch, they heard Becky's group had finished the scenario in 1/10 of the time. "She sealed and vented the kitchen in the first 3 minutes," Yaz reported grimly. "They gave her top marks." "But what about the crew in the kitchen mod?" asked Yume in confusion. "They died?" Asuka watched Becky further down the table, laughing with AM and some of the other officers. She caught Asuka's eye and narrowed hers a fraction as if to say, "So what?" "She put the mission first," said Asuka, taking a bite of curry without tasting it. Wondered which she would choose if she had to. Chapter 52. The Phoenix, 3,982 cycles after launch, 2 cycles after explosion, B shift. 2 officers seized Asuka by either arm and made her sit on a little child's stool. They had dragged Asuka and Ruth to the nursery, and now they stood around them in a circle. Instinctively, Asuka hunched down to make herself smaller. She could feel the heat of their hostility, and she didn't know what she had done to cause it. She dared a glance at Yume, searching for a sign of what might be coming, but Yume wouldn't meet her gaze. "There could be some other explanation," said Yume. Ruth started to stand, but they pushed her down. "Get off me! What are you doing? Whatever your theory is, you're wrong. We didn't do anything. We sacrificed everything to be part of this mission. Same as you. I found you that letter, didn't I?" "Which you could have planted," said AM. Asuka pushed her gaze to the floor. "Bullshit," said Ruth. "As far as I know, you didn't take an elective in knowing the fuck about everything." "I'm a senior officer," AM said, fury plain. "Everyone, be quiet," said Yume, massaging her temples. "Yume, why are we even entertaining this?" "It's Captain," said Yume. "Everyone stop, and let me think." AM's hands curled into fists. They walked over and glared at something in their door that coincided with the wall. Yume pulled out a nursing chair and sat heavily in it. Her feet were bare and swollen, and she flexed her toes with a grimace of pain. "Susie, your mother was arrested. She's been accused of terrorism as a known member of SME. She's been a fugitive for 5 years after participating in a series of attacks on oil rigs. Mission Control found her by tracing the letters she sent to you and Ruth. Asuka felt her throat closing up, as if she were in that suit again, running out of oxygen. Ruth shifted in her chair. That's ridiculous. Asuka's mom isn't a terrorist. Tell them, Asuka. It was so very important to count the white tiles on the floor, but it was hard to do when the lines were blurring. Asuka blinked, and a few tears fell to the floor. I haven't talked to her in 11 years, she whispered. No, but Ruth has, Yume said. And a couple people told me Ruth used to secretly attend SME meetings back on Earth. But since you were best friends, I guess you knew that. For once, Ruth was at a loss for words. Here's what Mission Control thinks, Yume said. As an alt, it would have been easy for you to access all the materials. You assembled the bombs and put them in the toolkits. You tricked the exterior cam to show an anomalous object when you were sure you'd be asked to participate in the mission. You went out there with Kat, but you made sure you were slow, so that when Kat got to the right spot, you were far enough away to avoid getting shredded by the explosion. And then, you made sure to point the finger in every other direction. As for that so-called Trojan letter, easy enough for Ruth to plant it, as communications specialist. Convenient how it was deleted by the time our programming team did their forensics. And what? Asuka and I pretended to have a massive feud the last year? How exactly did we conspire when we were barely talking to each other? Come on, said AM. Everyone knows how close you were back in school. 24 square tiles in Asuka's field of vision? Maybe 30? She started over. Yume's voice was thick with disappointment. I thought it was a miracle when you got back to the airlock without a scratch after the explosion. I was so relieved you were safe. When it was by design. And Engine 3, said AM. You sabotaged that too, didn't you? This is all absurd, said Ruth. Look at what the letters actually say. Her mom said she hadn't heard from Asuka. I said I would talk to her. That's it. It could be code, said AM. We don't know? That's right. You don't know. Yume stood again and put a hand on AM's wrist, but they shook the captain off. Ruth was getting loud. And I could tell you any manner of theories that might sound more real. For example, who let us fingerprint every member of the crew, knowing full well her prints wouldn't be found? Who authorized shutting off Alpha right before our most important mission? And who has access to everyone's correspondence besides me? Susie, said AM. Nope. I'm talking about the one who had something to gain by all this, by McMahone's death. Ruth shrugged off the hands holding her. Asuka lifted her head in shock. It could be, but they all followed her gaze to Yume, whose eyes had narrowed to slits. You think it was me? Said Yume. But Asuka liked Yume. It seemed to Asuka that they were in a forest, that she could see a red glow around the corners of her vision. It's not ridiculous, AM said. Tony wanted to remove you. She told all of us, and then you went crying about it to Mission Control. That's not what happened. Oh, really? So you claim now that you didn't talk to Mission Control? I did, but... And you weren't upset she wanted you out? Yes, but you knew you didn't have the support from other officers, and you did what you could to protect your role in this mission. No. Yume slammed a fist on the table. She had all of their attention now. She wanted me removed because I reported what she did to mission control. Everyone stared at her. Ruth spoke first. What are you talking about? Mick Mahone messed with the donor assignment system, tried to maintain racial purity. Yume's mouth twisted. Bloody hell, muttered Ruth. AM retreated a step. No, Tony wouldn't. She thought we should have an option to choose a donor from our own country, that was it. It was the lack of certainty as they said this that made everyone sure it was true. Fortunately, how you figured it out before McMahon had affected too many procedures and quietly reset it. But then when McMahon came to them with an upgrade patch for the pharmaceutical printer, they were concerned, so they came to me. Asuka remembered how he was anxious sorting through the vials, their certainty that Lala wasn't involved. I told Lala and Winnie because they both had been administered something from the printer after the upgrade. But you don't actually know if there was anything wrong with the upgrade. No, we don't, agreed Yume. I've been waiting for confirmation from Mission Control. When did you tell Winnie? Asuka asked. About a cycle before the explosion, why? That's why Winnie called her down to the dining mod, Asuka said. To confront her. It would have been a heated argument. Enough that they might have ignored the first couple of warnings about a leak, thinking it was the sensor malfunctioning again. Yume spread her hands. Mission Control ordered me not to say anything to anyone else for sake of ship morale. Frankly, they seemed more worried about optics back home. Well, shit, said AM, looking like they might puke. I told Hao-Yu to revert to the old code just in case. We did it quietly so no one would know. So, no, I wasn't worried that Mission Control was going to let her remove me. Still, it must have made you angry that they left her in charge, said Ruth. You think I want to be captain? They were worried about the geopolitical situation back home. Things were already tense, and they were trying to avoid a war. No, of course I didn't agree or like it, but I've always put this mission, this crew, first. Yume's voice had risen an octave, and Asuka believed her. Fuck Mission Control, said Ruth. You're going to let them accuse us? If McMahon was a Mackie, maybe Lala was right, Asuka said. Maybe she did this. What, she blew herself up? AM said. I know she wasn't nice, but even if what Yume said is true, there is no way. She wouldn't have harmed the mission. Asuka appealed to Yume. Don't do this. Please. I'm sorry. I have to follow orders from Mission Control. Yume covered her face. What do they know? They aren't here. Ruth struggled to free herself. Why didn't you tell me about your mom? Yume asked Asuka. Because Asuka stopped and swallowed hard. I didn't want it to be true. It's not true. She hasn't done anything. There has to be some other explanation. God, what a mess. Alpha, put them under sensory isolation and don't let them leave. That crackling sound was back, like something was burning. Was that barking? She closed her eyes and counted to 100. When she opened her eyes again, she was alone in a forest. Hello? She asked, but nothing. She pressed her temple, but nothing happened. She was trapped in this other reality. She twisted and realized she was tied to something. A crib, maybe, or a chair. Alpha? Can anyone hear me? except she couldn't hear herself over the sound of brush on fire. Perhaps she had no voice. How could she even know if she was speaking? She was standing on dried, crumpled leaves, perfect for tinder. The birds were gone. Fire was coming. Everything would be destroyed because of her. "Pineapple," she tried to say. "Pineapple." But her mother couldn't hear her. As the minutes passed, her sense of time and space began to falter. What if the journey had been a lie? And the whole time they'd been buried in some kind of subterranean vault in the Arizona desert? There was no way to prove it. How could she ever know for sure? Reality was a place she didn't own anymore. She was dispossessed.